Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 91 of the Former Action Guys podcast. I'm your host, Justin Kramer. And this week I have on Marine Major Charlie Benbow. He's a infantry officer who has done 9 deployments, who was a enlisted guy before he became an officer. He went to the Virginia Military Institute. Like I said, he's an infantry officer. And in this podcast, we don't get into obviously his 9 deployments. It's just way too many, so we're gonna have to break this down into a couple podcasts. But we do talk about his training up into becoming an infantry officer, and then getting to 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines right before the deployment, like 6 months before they do the invasion in Iraq. So really good conversation. We get into the invasion. We talk about all of that, and that's kind of where we end there. And we'll come back and talk about his second deployment to Afghanistan and follow on, and like his time at ANGLICO, because he was an ANGLICO Marine as well, which is kind of a rarity having an infantry officer at ANGLICO. It's something that happened, but it's definitely wasn't a common thing, or at least nowadays it's not, for sure. So really good conversation, and I look forward to our follow-on conversations later on. I think you guys are really going to enjoy us talk about the invasion, Task Force Tarawa's role in the invasion, and specifically some of the stuff we talk about in Nasiriyah and stuff like that. As always, if you haven't already, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I got another one. It wasn't a written review. It was just someone just clicked 5 stars, which I appreciate that. 91 straight 5-star reviews. Be cool Christmas present if I got 100 before Christmas. But hey, no pressure to the listeners. If you don't want to do that, you can also subscribe on YouTube. Hey, I'm still cutting clips now that I'm out of school. I got about a month off between until my next classes pick up. So I'm going to go back and watch some of the old episodes and stuff like that, and cut out some of the more important or interesting stories, and post those up on my YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe there so you get notifications of when those pop up. As always, hit up my Instagram at Former Action Guys. Hit up my website, jkramergraphics.com, and enjoy the episode. Okay. We'll try this again. Charlie Benbow, welcome to the podcast. For the listeners, they didn't see, we had technical issues there, but luckily it happened at the very beginning. So if we get cut off, you're going to switch computers, and we'll continue on. So if you see a cut in the video, that's what happened. But thanks for coming on the podcast, man. I started talking about it before. You have a kind of a long history, a long career that started out as an enlisted guy in the reserves, and I kind of like to get into that and your transition to becoming an officer and what that was like, and maybe any advice you'd have for people. But let's start with like where you're from, what made you decide to join the Marine Corps in particular, and why did you choose that MOS?
Okay. Yeah. So, just starting to say, I didn't really have any military history in the family. My grandfathers both served during World War II. My uncle on my dad's side, or my great uncle on my dad's side, excuse me. But my dad didn't serve. I had an uncle that served during Vietnam because he knew he was going to get drafted, so he enlisted anyway. Ended up serving on the Korean DMZ in 68, 69 time frame. Mm-hmm. But then growing up, like my dad, because he kind of idolized his uncle who was a fighter pilot in World War II, he had, took me to a lot of air shows. And so I kind of grew up wanting to be a pilot after going to all these air shows. Mm-hmm. I was always fixated on the Air Force. I think there was probably a brief period when Top Gun, the first time I saw Top Gun, where I thought about the Navy. Yeah. But, I mostly focused on the Air Force until about the end of my sophomore year in high school. And then I had a guy that I was hanging out with back then who just up and joined the Marine Corps Reserve out of the blue. Like nobody expected it. He just met a recruiter, signed up, and shipped off to boot camp. And he introduced me to the recruiter before he shipped. Mm-hmm. And the recruiter pulled out his best sales pitch and told me all about the guaranteed flight contract, and got me sold on that. He was trying to get me to enlist and go to MECEP, because obviously he doesn't get any credit for referring me to the OSO. But he couldn't quite get me there. I kind of always grown up just expecting to go to college right out of high school, so I never made the leap to enlisting straight away, which I in some way regret. Like I think I would have done better in college if I had spent a little more time instead of going straight out of high school.
That's something that I've actually brought up on the podcast before, because I'm in school. The listeners know I'm in school right now at San Diego State University, and it seems to me like a lot of guys get out of the Marine Corps and don't want to go to school because they think they won't do well or they're not going to enjoy it. And I'm like, to me, it seems like it's easier now because you have actual life experience, and you can kind of understand the concepts that they're trying to convey to you. Plus, the whole fact is that you get to pick what classes you want to take and stuff like that, so you can find stuff that's interesting. But I found it easier to take college classes now as a 30, I'm 36, as a 36-year-old compared to when I was an 18-year-old in high school. Like, this is way more interesting and keeps me, I don't know what your thoughts maybe on that are.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like whole different work ethic too.
Mm-hmm.
Like from when I was 18, fresh out of high school to, after 4 years, like I just, even at my senior year of college, like I did a lot better than I would in my first year. I would have, I think, benefited a lot from it.
Yeah,
Just overall, I could have used the extra
for
maturity,
sure.
but whatever. Water under the bridge. I went straight into college. Went to VMI straight out of high school. That was kind of an interesting flip there because I'd always been focused on like going to NC State or big state university, and my mom, who had gone to college up in Virginia, wanted me to go look at schools in Virginia, so I kind of grudgingly went along. We went to Virginia Tech, and originally I was like, Virginia Tech's awesome. Like, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a gorgeous campus up in the mountains near Blacksburg. So I fell in love with that at first. I was like, this is definitely where I want to go. And then the next day we went to VMI and literally like stepped foot on the campus, and I mean, it was like, this is it. This is where I want to be. And it took a while to convince my folks of that.
Why is that?
They just, I mean, again, not having a military background, and they kind of saw, we're still kind of, I think, thinking about the stereotypes of VMI and the Citadel and what those schools are like, and not really understanding, like, with me and my background, not understanding why I was suddenly fixated on going to this place.
Military school, yeah. Can you,
like, just completely different environment?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I was gonna say, can you kind of explain? I grew up in the South. As a kid, I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then I moved to Indiana. But being in Chattanooga, I always heard about the Citadel. And I was in South Carolina for it was like an MRAP maintenance course that I was taking down in South Carolina. And we had like the weekends off. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to drive over and check out the Citadel because I've always heard about it and I want to check it out. And they have like a little museum and stuff. And I always thought it was pretty interesting, like those military schools. But they're military schools that don't require you to actually join the military afterwards. And I think they said at the Citadel, only like 25% of the graduates actually join the military. Is it similar to that at VMI? And can you kind of explain what's the draw for people to go to a school like that where you get pretty degraded for your freshman year? Like, what's the draw of that?
I mean, you could do a whole like episode on that place because the culture is different than you expect. Yeah. It's not. In some ways it's like the Marine Corps, in some ways completely different. But so what I remember, like when we did your first week when you go there, which is probably the closest to a boot camp experience, is called Hell Week. And it's the 1 week where you're like day on, stay on. Like you wake up at whatever time Reveille was, 0506, you go out and you PT, and then you spend all day drilling and, doing kind of boot camp style for that week. But there's just like they break it up with classes in boot camp, we had different things we went to. I remember one of them being the RTC orientation, and they brought us in, and all the RTC departments came in and gave a quick like video of like who they were and what they did, and like try to talk you into contracting with their branch. And VMI requires you to attend RTC all 4 years while you're there, so you have to pick one of the branches. And I remember them asked, I can't remember who it was that asked, but they had I think there were about 450 rats in our class at the time. They brought everybody in and said, hey, how many of you intend to commission? And I want to say, my recollection is that over 2/3 of the class raised their hand.
Cool.
That like 2/3 to 75% of the guys raised their hand. By the time we graduated, I think my class was less than 20% that commissioned. So honestly, I think a lot of guys, like just 4 years in the environment at VMI, like they just didn't want anything more to do with the military environment.
Two things. One, you said rats. Is that like the name for like the freshmen, like incoming guys?
Yeah. So your first year, they call it the rat line, and you're referred to as a rat during that first like 6 months.
That's funny.
Until you break out in the spring.
And then second, do you think that a lot of people say they think what they saw at VMI is what like the military is actually going to be like, and can I assume it's nothing like the actual like being in the fleet.
Yeah, like so in some ways, like obviously, a difference in the fleet, like you're not deploying, not really doing a lot of field ops, right? Like being in a grunt battalion or being in an RD battalion. But at the same time, like you have less freedom in some cases than a guy in the fleet.
Yeah.
Like, so day to day, you're in uniform all day, every day. You're very rarely allowed to go out in town. Like the concept of, in the Marine Corps, you just get liberty, right? At the end of the workday, you're on liberty. You go out in town, do whatever you want. Like at VMI, it's considered, it was called, I think General Permit was the name, or GP. And you actually had to go sign out to go out in town. You had to be in uniform in town. You could not, VMI is in Rockbridge County, and you were not allowed to be in Rockbridge County out of uniform, except under special circumstances. So if you went out in town, you were in uniform.
How often did you go out in town not in uniform? How many guys sneak out,
Yeah, that's not uncommon. I mean, we snuck out more in uniform, to be honest, because it's actually easier to blend in. There's enough people that are out there in uniform authorized that.
Okay. It makes more sense.
It's a little more because you stand out in town if you're in civilian attire most of the time. So everybody knows you're a cadet. The only guys that are allowed to be out in civilian attire are the seniors or the first classmen. So if they see you, they know you're not a first classman and you're in civilian attire, you're going to get yoked up.
Yeah, that's funny.
So it's actually easier to just put on your uniform like you're authorized and go out.
That's more like old school military rules. Having to sign out, here's your Liberty card or whatever, here's your Liberty shit for the weekend, and you have to wear your uniform. Anything else is contraband.
There were guys who were from that county, obviously were allowed to change out of their uniform when they went home. And my roommate, my third class year or sophomore year, his parents bought a house in town. They were from New Jersey, bought a house in the historic area of the downtown, but didn't move in until I think our junior year. So for an entire year, we had this house that his parents owned that they didn't live in. So we spent a lot of weekends at his house. And it was generally understood, as soon as we went in the house, we all kept a change of clothes inside the house and we'd just go change over and then have little house parties there. It was kind of funny, because they have actual commissioned officers on the staff there that are called TAC officers. And they're kind of you have a cadet officer of the day, but you also have this TAC officer that's on duty every day. And it was one of their required checks for that TAC officer was to go by Rich's house and see what we were up to.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, so we could party. They didn't really care as long as we stayed on the property, on the porch. We weren't out partying in the front yard or anything like that. It didn't really bother.
You're the second ANGLICO guy I've met that was a VMI graduate. We had a dude at First ANGLICO, Captain McDonald, who was a VMI graduate as well. And can you kind of talk about why people are joining this university to have the exact opposite kind of college experience that most people are looking for?
So I thought about because I knew that question was going to come up. I thought about it a little bit this past week. It's kind of especially with most of your listeners being Marines, I'd ask the same question, you could join the Air Force and get the same benefits as being in the Marine Corps. In fact, get a little better benefits. Why did you go in the Marine Corps instead of the Air Force? It's kind of a similar mindset, I guess. Looking for a little bit of a challenge, kind of looking for that sense of belonging. It's a really tight group once you've been through it. The saying is, VMI, and I'm sure it's true for the Citadel as well, but it's a great place to be from. It's a terrible place to be at.
That's nice.
So,
yeah,
I don't know that we were thinking that when I was 18 years old. I was probably more interested in just challenging myself and see if I could do it. But yeah, I mean, it's a really tight knit group afterwards. And the cool thing that I like about the state schools compared to the federal academies is we all kind of cross over. I've had Citadel guys offer me jobs just out of the blue, just because I had a VMI ring on my hand.
Oh, that's cool. I know that's a huge thing.
And so I went to this, it was a debutante ball up in DC when I was a cadet. And they had guys from all the academies, I think except Air Force, but they had Coast Guard, Merchant Marine, Army, Navy, and then they had Norwich, Citadel, and VMI all there. And the Norwich, Citadel, and VMI guys all went off and drank together while all the federal academies kind of stayed to themselves.
Yeah.
Stayed in their own little clique. So I thought that was cool. We had actually just, a good friend of mine had just led a raid down to the Citadel. They have a Jeep that their superintendent drives in during the parades. He drives down the line in this old, World War II style Jeep. So a buddy of mine put together a raid went down there and stole this thing, like loaded it on a U-Haul and drove it back to Virginia. And about 2 weeks later, we went to this debutante ball, and I, as soon as I linked up with the Citadel guys, I didn't pay for a drink that night.
That's funny.
They all thought it was awesome.
That's awesome.
You know?
That is awesome. So how did you?
So, yeah.
Can you kind of talk about now how you went from this to the Marine Corps?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, like I said, I kind of set my mind on the Marine Corps before I really found out about VMI. Like I decided I want to do this flight contract thing. The recruiter was trying to get me enlist and do MESAP, and I just wasn't biting. But I did know that I was going to go Marine option once I got to VMI. So yeah, I signed up for Marine RTC. Once I matriculated, started doing that, and then at some point, and early on in the rat year, they brought the local recruiter in that's up there in Lexington, Virginia, and he explained that there's this thing called a 92-day reservist where you can go to boot camp in the summer and then go drill with the reserve unit, and you don't have to miss any time at college. And I was like, well, man, I wish the guy back home had told me about that. Like I probably would have joined before I went to college. Yeah. So he told me, and he told us about it, and I went home over. We got a Thanksgiving break, and I went home and basically told my parents, like, I'm joining the Marine Corps. I'm going to go join the reserves and go to boot camp this summer. And at that point, like I said, they weren't really keen on me going to VMI at first. And at this point, they're just like, well, I mean, we can't stop you, so I guess you're just going to do what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And so I found the local recruiter, and like he wasn't in, so I stuck a note on his door and was like, hey, I want to join. Give me a call. Which was kind of funny. I knew the Navy recruiter. Like he had tried to get me into the Navy when I was still in high school, and I kind of kept up with him. He and I had actually gone fishing once or twice. And so I went and talked to him like a day or two later, and he's like, man, you made that Marine's day. So he was kind of having trouble making quota, and to have a guy walk up and like shove a note in the door, say, hey, call me.
That's funny.
Was huge for him. So yeah, I signed up for them, signed up for the reserves down in my hometown, which was, I mean, it all worked out, but come to find out, like for a recruiter, when you sign a guy up in the reserves, it's not, whereas you sign up for active duty, like you have all the MOSs available nationwide. They can only sign you up for whatever is available at the local reserve units.
Yeah.
And the only thing available when I signed up was an admin clerk at a unit in Greensboro. So I signed up as an admin clerk, which I was not thrilled about.
I bet.
Yeah. But, everybody was like, hey, don't worry about it. Like you can when you get to your unit up in Virginia, you're going to, once you get to your unit in Greensboro, you're going to transfer to the unit in Virginia because it's closer to where you're going to college. And then they'll just lap move you into a new MOS, especially since you won't have been to school, to your MOS school. So I was like, all right. But the thing is, you have to do an interview when you join the reserves. You have to call and talk to somebody from the INI. So I had to interview with the INI first sergeant. And the recruiter was like, hey, whatever you do, don't mention that you're going to transfer as soon as you get out of boot camp to Virginia. And of course, the first sergeant's not stupid. Like he starts asking me, like, hey, what are you going to be doing in civilian life when you're not at drill? And I said, well, I'm in college. Okay, where are you going to college? Well, I go to VMI up in Lexington. Oh, so you're going to drive all the way from Greensboro or from Lexington down to Greensboro for every drill weekend? I was like, well, crap, I can't lie to the guy. So no, I'm gonna transfer to a unit closer by, and the recruiter's off to the side. I see him immediately like slap his
the one thing
hand over his face. The one thing I told you not to do. I mean, the first sergeant didn't care. Like he would maybe he chewed out the recruiters later. He didn't say anything to me, and that's how it worked. Like I graduated boot camp. I did that, and then checked in Greensboro and Alphas, and then they immediately did my transfer up to the engineer unit in Roanoke, Virginia.
And so once you do that transfer, then you go back to MOS school, or you hadn't even gone to MOS school yet at this point, right?
Yeah, because I was a 92-day reservist. I did boot camp and then straight back to college.
So at what point did you go to MOS school, and then how long were you in the reserves for?
So I was in for 3 years. The way they do it is your next summer break from college, they send you to MOS school. It's a little weird, like their priority, because obviously they have to report how many guys they have MOS qualified, so they don't care about MCT. They need to get you MOS qualified. So they send you to MOS school the next time around. I never went to MCT.
Huh. That's really interesting. I
Yeah.
remember having some 90. They call them 90-day reserves that they come through when I was in MOS school, and dudes were mad because they got the first seats automatically for school. It was because they were like, "Hey, we have
Yeah.
to, they have to be done by a certain date to fulfill their contract." And I was like, "Oh, well, that sucks for everyone else, but I guess good on you."
Yeah. I mean, for some guys, when you go to boot camp, depending on when you have to go back to college, like some guys will skip mess and maintenance week and they'll actually move up a company so that they graduate a week sooner to get back to
Really?
college on time.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I had enough time. Yeah, I had enough time that I did the full
Oh,
13
well, that's
weeks.
good. So how compare your time in boot camp and then and the reserves to like your VMI experience? Was it after you had gone through boot camp and you're now in the Marines? Was it tough to go back and listen to people, like pretend to be in the military at VMI?
Not so, I mean, it's really the only time that you're uh, getting really treated like a, a boot or a recruit. Like uh, you're basically treated like shit for that first 6 months there.
Yeah.
Um, and then, you've got upperclassmen doing the, whatever the Army calls it, the shark attack. Like you're getting, dogpiled by upperclassmen from time to time and doing sweat parties, which is what kind of like a pit session without the sand, as we call it, sweat parties. So I went through all that, and then I went to boot camp. And I thought about it a couple times. I've talked to guys over the years about it. Like I have friends that went to boot camp first before they went to through the route line, and I did the opposite. And my personal theory is whichever one you do first is going to be the hardest.
Yeah.
Because it's that initial shock, right? Of
Yeah.
like, holy shit, they're yelling at me. Like, what's going on? Uh, by the time you've been through it, like you figure out. I mean, just like when you're a third phase recruit, like getting quarterdeck doesn't really phase you that much anymore. It's just like whatever. I'll go do some push-ups. Like, yeah, it sucks, but it's just what you do.
Yeah. You
By the
understand the
time I got
game.
Yeah, by the time I got to boot camp, like I remember one of my classmates, we call him Brother Rats, was in my platoon, and I remember during pickup, like looking over at him, and we're both trying not to laugh uh, at the antics of the drill instructors,
Yeah.
just because it wasn't shocking to us anymore. We'd seen it all before, and it was hilarious watching the other guys kind of freak out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So
It is that
there,
that is definitely something a lot of people, until you see grown men go crazy, like a
yeah,
DI and stuff does. I guess after you've seen it, you're like, all right, well, just quit yelling. Whenever you're done yelling, we'll get on to do whatever we have to do next. You get like I said before, you kind of understand the game.
yeah, pretty much. And I think the only hard time was so when you first get off the bus, you go through the whole yellow footprint thing, and then they shoved us in a classroom,
Mm-hmm.
and basically like, hey, they put us in a dark classroom, told us to put our heads down, but don't go to sleep, obviously. And they kept coming in and check, make sure we were still awake. But it basically just gave you time to think about like, oh crap.
Yeah, what the
And I was
fuck?
just all I could think was, man, I got like 13 weeks of this crap.
Yeah, that's
Like,
what.
I just did this, and I got to do it again.
Yeah, you start out and you're like, man, what am I doing? What am I doing? And but then like you said, you get used to it and you understand the game and you get a little brainwashed. You become robotic in
Yeah,
your movements and
yep.
whatnot. Um,
Once I got rolling, it was no big deal. I mean, my senior drill instructor didn't care for VMI, so
oh
I mean, I
really?
remember him. Yeah, he would yell at me when we were drilling, like, "Hey, dress right, Benbow. Like, you're from VMI, you don't even know how to drill." Or I forgot to secure my rifle to the rack one night. We got in the racks, and I heard my rifle hit the deck, and I
Oh no.
went from laying flat on my back on the top bunk to online like that. I mean, he's like, went to VMI, I can't even secure a rifle. Like, all right,
They're gonna
whatever.
hold it against you for the whole
That
time.
was Yeah, that was about all. Like I was fairly good gray recruit.
Did
So
did you do anything in your reserve time that you want to kind of go over before we talk about when you switch to active duty?
uh, I mean, it was pretty standard. Just I mean, we were in a combat engineer unit, so we went to the field pretty regularly, about every weekend, either Fort Pickett or Jefferson National Forest. Did some cool demo. I hadn't even been to engineer school yet. We went out for a weekend at Fort Pickett, and the National Guard runs Fort Pickett,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted a bunch of trees cut on one of their ranges because it was a bunch of trees had grown up blocking EOP. And so the National Guard pulled out all this demo. It was like, hey, we'll provide the demo. You guys come do the cutting.
Oh, that's sick.
And and so we just got to blow trees all day on a Saturday.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
learned all these tree cutting charges. And then at the end of the day, though, we got done, and we still had a bunch of demo left. And we're like, hey, here, turn this back into the ASP. And this National Guard major was like, nope, get rid of it. So we did it basically. Like, I remember my squad leader coming over, like, hey, grab everything you can find, put it on that big tree over there.
That's awesome.
And they ended up doing a big junk shot at the day down in some gully. I know the company commander was pretty upset. He's like, yeah, we don't like wasting. I mean, especially this was the 90s, right? Like, you don't like wasting ammo back then because there wasn't a lot to go around. But,
yeah, that's what I've heard. It was kind of lean, kind of after the Gulf War and stuff like that, and through the Clinton administration. There was a lot of there's a lot of notional training, notional things happening rather than actual shooting and stuff. Can you? I guess you're the first combat engineer I've had on the show. You want to kind of talk about what a combat engineer is and what they do? And I know there's a couple different aspects to being a combat engineer. So if you want to kind of cover those a little bit before we move on to your time in the infantry.
Yeah, I mean, so they do. Oh man, it's probably some of my engineering structures can roll over. Like, I know general engineering, obviously like horizontal, vertical construction, uh, demolition, force protection, and then obviously like obstacle breaching. So yeah, like you said, there's different flavors of engineers. Like, you all go to the same course, but when you get to the fleet, you either go to the Combat Engineer Battalion in the Marine Division, which supports generally the infantry and the maneuver units, right? And they're focused more on the force protection aspect of, building fortifications, and also on obviously the breaching aspect of breaching obstacles and fortifications to allow the infantry to do their mission. Then the MLG, back then it was the Force Service Support Group, or the FSSG, but they have the Engineer Support Battalion. They're more focused on general engineering, construction. They still do some of the obstacle clearance, fortification, that kind of stuff, but they're a little more construction focused. And then in the Marine Wing support squadrons and the Air Wing, you've got other engineers, and they're much more construction focused, basically on helping build expeditionary airfields, that kind of stuff.
So are most people trying to get over into the combat engineer side where they're dealing with the breaching and like route clearance and stuff like that?
That's like, you'd want to talk to somebody who's been an active engineer more, because being a reserve, it's like my only option was division engineers, and obviously we were pretty cocky about being division engineers and not those pogues, even though we all had the same MOS.
Yeah, you guys build and stuff. We're over here blowing up trees. That's funny.
Exactly. I mean, we got out and hiked. Like, you have like every squad has a 240, so you're humping machine guns and SMAWs, and we did a fair amount of humping, just like the grunts. So it was yeah, I don't know. Like, there was definitely some cockiness about being a division engineer, and like having had engineers attached to me later on as a grunt. Like, the same thing kind of applied. Like, they just kind of became part of the crew. Like, you still kind of needle them every now and then for being those engineer pogues. But
I'll have to.
I took my back.
Yeah, I'll have to have an engineer come on. Shout out to those guys, man. They spent a lot of time fucking sweeping roads and stuff in Afghanistan and in the route clearance vehicles, and a lot of those dudes got blown up out there looking for IEDs and stuff. So, I mean, you can't hate on those guys. They did a hard job while they were over there for sure.
And especially give a shout out to the MLG and the wing guys. Like, with the way the wars were in Iraq and Afghanistan, those guys got out a lot too and did a lot of great work.
Yeah. So you were in the engineers for a few years, and then at what point did you decide you want to come active duty and become an officer, do that transition?
So that kind of always been the plan. Like, I'd always been working towards that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really joined the reserves to get a little bit more experience, a little bit of seasoning. Really, the idea was like, hey, this might make me a better officer, so I'll go get some experience on the enlisted side.
That's
like, that was kind of
this seems like a common thought process for a lot of guys. They're like, I'm going to go enlisted, become a Mustang officer, go that route, and then become an officer. Do you recommend that now that you've seen both sides? Do you recommend that kind of route, or would you recommend if someone wants to become an officer just to go straight into it?
So it definitely benefited me. I don't like. There's so many different factors that go into that. Like, I'm not convinced. Yeah.
Well, I'm
not convinced that that's true as a general rule.
Okay, there we go. I got you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's true as a general rule, that prior enlisted guys are always better officers. Like, I met great officers who never spent a day enlisted. I've met, some bad officers who were prior enlisted, and obviously vice versa. Like I've
Yeah.
some great officers who were prior enlisted. I do think the prior enlisted guys seem to kind of burn out a little sooner.
Hmm.
Like you don't see their ranks
Yeah, that's
because
true.
they end up retiring. I mean, it's not always true. Like I know a guy just pinned on colonel recently, who I think was a prior gunny, uh, who's a phenomenal guy, was a great battalion commander. Um, but again, it's really kind of dependent on everybody's situation.
Hmm.
Um, it would have been a better answer for me, definitely. Like, but that's with hindsight being 2020. Like, I think I would have done better had I enlisted first.
Yeah.
Doing the reserve thing, it got me some of the benefits of having the enlist experience without, taking the time away from going through college. Um, there's probably some benefit to being, a second lieutenant at 22 when you're still fairly young and fit.
Yeah, for sure.
Take
Yeah.
a beating, but I don't know, man. Like that's a hard one to really answer. Like it's I think
Situation
it depends a lot
dictates.
on individual, yeah, individual maturity level, man. I think that's a big part of it. Like, are you mature enough uh, to go straight into college and be an officer? Some people are. Uh, I was probably just barely, and probably should have spent a little bit more time on the enlisted side first. But I do think going to boot camp helped a lot, and definitely when it came to going to OCS later, like having that already under my belt was really helpful. Already knowing the Marine Corps culture, having been kind of immersed in it already.
Okay. So now you go through OCS, your
Yeah,
third time getting hazed, your
four
trial
times
by
total.
fire. Fourth. Oh, fourth. Okay.
Yeah, because I
How
did.
was that for you? Were
Uh,
you just kind of tired of that by that point?
yeah, so I did split option OCS. There's I know a couple of the other guys have talked about it. Like there's basically three different ways you can go. You can contract RTC. The RTC guys go for 1 6 week iteration after their junior year, or if you go PLC through the officer selection officer, um, I guess really through the OSO, there's three options. You can do PLC juniors and seniors, which is what I did. You can do PLC combined, which is the 1 10 week
Mm-hmm.
period after junior year generally, or you can do what they call OCC. So as you sign up,
Guys okay.
or after they've already graduated, we'll go to.
Can you say that again, guys who sign up what? I
Um,
lost you for a
I
second.
in their last year of college,
Okay.
so I went split option. I went to PLC juniors. I kind of punted my grades one semester, so I had to roll back to a later class for juniors. So I went after my junior year. Typically, juniors you go after your sophomore year, but I went after my junior year of college. And VMI had a great prep program. So I mean, they basically just PT the dog shit out of us. 5 days
Mm-hmm.
a week. A little bit of drill, a lot of PT. I mean, things like I ended up being the guide for our little like OCS prep platoon. So I did like a 7 mile run carrying a guide on through the hills of
That does not
Lexington.
sound like fun.
No, but I ended up in great shape when I went to juniors, and so juniors I thought was pretty easy. Um, like there were a bunch of priors in my platoon. My rack mate was a former sergeant. He and I got on really well. And what I remember in juniors was just laughing for like 6 weeks straight because I was watching the sergeant instructors do their thing. And I had a couple sergeant instructors that were just absolutely hilarious. And so it was really just a challenge to try to keep my bearing for 6 weeks. Uh, and I was lucky because I had the rack right next to the
Yeah.
hut, and there was a fan between me and the door of the hut, so they usually couldn't see me as soon as they came out of the hut. So uh, like I remember just absolutely cracking up and having just enough time to lock it up before they could zero in on me. But they get the guy next to me because they'd see him first, and he wasn't prior, so he had a tougher time, like kind of reining it in. Uh, but I remember just having like juniors was a little bit of PT, wasn't that difficult. Like they give you some familiarization. Like it's really kind of intended for guys coming straight off the street. Like here's kind of like an initial intro to the Marine Corps, and they don't stress you that bad. Um, Certainly not compared to boot camp. Then I went back after I graduated from college. I went back to seniors, and that was night and day difference. So juniors was, I want to say, like 30 training
Mm-hmm.
days, and seniors, they treat you like it's training day 31, like you never left. You just hit the ground running, and it's a lot faster paced. The PT's harder, um, and the expectations are a lot higher. And I actually like, I know guys who have had different experiences in seniors, but I felt like 6 weeks of PLC seniors was worse than boot camp.
Really?
Like I would rather go back to boot camp than go back to PLC seniors.
Is PLC something they still do?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a way to join the Marine Corps without going through ROTC. So even though I VMI made me take ROTC classes for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
I was not contracted through the ROTC department. So I could have taken Army ROTC if I wanted and still contracted PLC. Like I could
Okay.
have, and I knew guys who did that because the the Marine department when I was there um, didn't always have the best reputation. Like most of us who were contracted Marines and were pretty like into it, liked the guys just fine. Like we but a lot of the folks that weren't into the Marine Corps thing or were still kind of on the fence didn't like the guys that were there. The major that was the Marine officer instructor and the captain that was the junior MOI. They drove some guys away. And a matter of fact,
Mm-hmm.
like after I commissioned, I went back and basically did recruiter's assistance with the OSO, and it was able to like contract a couple of guys through the OSO who wanted nothing to do with the RTC
Damn,
department.
that's
So
not a.
they want to be Marines. They just didn't want to do
That's bad.
those guys. I mean, it was kind of lean times for the Marine Corps, and their attitude in the Marine Department was, well, hey, then we don't particularly want them, so we're doing
Yeah.
fine as it is.
Yeah, that's true. So after all
And
this,
as it was, like
oh, go ahead.
go ahead. I say as it was, like the Marine Department was still commissioning more folks than like the Navy Department.
That's funny.
So
Yeah, I mean, go sit on a ship or go do other cool stuff like you're blowing trees up and stuff like that. There's a big. Why would you go for one over the other? So after you get done with all this stuff and now you go to IOC. Can you talk a little bit about IOC and how that was for you? Because I know a lot of guys say, a lot of infantry officers I talked to said it's a pretty physically demanding course. Like it's one of the most physical things they've ever done. Would you compare? Would you say the same?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, TBS was nothing. I mean, it was just 6 months of classes, a couple of humps, and we got to IOC. It started in August, and we did the initial. They call it the NDOC back then. They call it the CET now.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty sucky. A lot of rucking on that one. But then we started doing the field ops, and it's a lot of hiking on the field ops, like a lot of movement to contact and that kind of stuff. Um, I went through before they started doing the palm effects, and mine was 10 weeks long, all at Quantico.
Okay.
Um, and they did, IOC is one of those things like it's kind of like Fight Club. Like don't want to talk too much out of too many of the secrets. Like
Yeah.
IOC is a lot of there's a lot of head games, believe it or not. Like they kind of try to break you out of the TBS mindset because TBS is very much like by the book, do everything by the book, and IOC kind of tries to break you out of that a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and give you opportunity to kind of see where you can bend the rules and break the rules, but they don't tell you beforehand. You find out later this thing and you do it by the book and it sucks and you fail and they're like, well, why didn't you break the rules? What
Yeah.
was the penalty for breaking the rules? Like just do it, get the mission, accomplish the mission.
Yeah.
Like we had a movement to contact one day and there was a 7-ton parked over there that they had used for something like to drop off a water bowl. And we were trying to convince the student platoon sergeant, like, hey, let's go hijack the 7-ton. Screw doing this movement to contact. And somebody asked our class advisor, the captain, like, hey, what's kind of our left and right lateral limits here? And he said, hey, just don't have a what was the special what's the special forces Robin Sage.
Yeah. Robin Sage.
So if you ever hear about the story from Robin Sage where a couple of guys got killed, officer.
Yeah. So yeah, I have, and let me kind of give people background. Special forces the selection course or the end of the course, they have an exercise called Rob and Sage, and there's a town, like the whole town participates. They know this military exercise is going on, and it's a guerrilla warfare exercise. So the actual town and town people are in play somewhat, and these guys hijacked a vehicle basically. Right, and then they got shot. The police responded thinking it was an actual like robbery or something like that, and opened fire on these dudes. Correct any of that if any of that was.
Yeah, well, they were in the back of the pickup truck. I mean, it takes place over several counties in North Carolina. It's a pretty big exercise. They're in the back of a pickup truck. They got stopped by this police officer. They thought he was in the exercise, and he was not. He didn't know the exercise was going on, and so they thought he was a Op 4 police officer. And so one of them started yelling to the other guy, "Hey, get the gun out of the bed, or get the rifle, or something like that." So this police officer is facing two guys saying, "Hey, get the gun," not knowing it's an exercise, and he drew and fired and killed, I think, one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But that was like when we asked the captain. This was only a couple of years after that had happened. We asked him like, "Hey, what's kind of our boundaries that we can do here?" And he said, "Hey, just don't have a Rob and Sage. That's it."
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up not hijacking the 7-ton, and we did this god-awful movement to contact through Quantico. It was terrible. I mean, this was in August. We had a sergeant combat engineer attached to us because we were going to go do a attack on a fortified position, and he was going to basically simulate the breach for us. And I remember him just being amazed because we would go for like 30 minutes, and we begged the student platoon sergeant, like, "Hey, man, let's just take a 5-minute break." And so, all right, guys, 5 minutes, and we'd all just plop down on our packs and start chugging water. And then like 10 minutes later, he'd be coming down the line, kicking everybody, like, "Get up, guys, let's go." And I'll be cursing. I'm like, "No, forget you, man, we're not going." And eventually we get up and start going, but it was pretty terrible movement to contact that day. So yeah, a lot of that, just a lot of foot movements. You get to shoot every weapon system in the infantry battalion except for the TOW and javelin missiles and the sniper rifles, but you also get to hump just about every weapon system in the infantry battalion as well. So, like we hiked all the mortar systems during mortar week. We got to go do a pretty cool mortar shoot, and shoot a lot of rounds there. It was a great time, but it was also like it was definitely a kick in the nuts.
Yeah, I bet, man.
I think we agreed at the end, like we would have rather just gotten kicked in the nuts every day for 10 weeks than do.
Those mortars are not known for being light, so having to hike those around, you never, I always feel bad for those guys.
I remember having to do a hip shoot while we were there, and I'm running through the tree line with the damn 81 cannon on my pack, and just like bouncing off at trees as I'm trying to charge through the tree line. I got clocked. Was it the sight box? I think. Like I put it on my pack, and it came as I was swinging my pack up over my head to put it on. Like the sight box came. Like unstrapped, but it hung on by one strap, so it swung underneath my pack. So as I'm bringing my pack over my head, I just see the sight box coming right at me, right in the eye.
Oh man, I bet that felt great.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's one of those things again. Like, I'm glad I did it. I don't know if I ever want to do it again, but it was definitely a good time
for sure. So later on, you did multiple deployments as an infantry officer. Multiple combat deployments. How well do you think IOC prepared you to go into the fleet and lead Marines in actual combat?
I think very well. I mean, the side of it, like you definitely know the tactics, the weapon systems inside and out when you come out of there. The leadership part is where you're still kind of like got to figure out what you're doing as far as how to actually lead Marines. Mm-hmm. You dealt with your own peers for at that point 8 or 9 months, but you haven't been put in front of Marines to actually lead yet. So that's kind of the one thing. But I mean, every weapon system in the battalion, all the orders. You know how to do all that stuff. You know the tactics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I did anything in the fleet as hard as some of the movements.
Yeah. So let's talk about your transition to the fleet then. So now at this point, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like I'm about to. At this point, you have done Marine Corps boot camp. You've done OCS. You've gone through VMI as well. you've done
Yeah.
all this stuff, and now you're heading to the fleet. What was it like to be like, oh shit, now I'm finally going to be like an active duty in the fleet Marine?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much that. Like, still a 22-year-old kid, pretty much. But now I'm a lieutenant going to take charge of this rifle platoon. Yeah, I checked in. The battalion was in Bridgeport when I checked in, so I had a couple weeks where I was back with the rear party,
Mm-hmm.
which was the operations officer was back, and then he had a couple lieutenants from the 3 shop, and they were getting ready for a squad competition, like a battalion squad competition. So they had me and another guy go out and like run the course all through like the Verona Loop area over here at Camp Lejeune to proof the timelines and make sure the timelines worked. Actually, we had a staff sergeant that was there with us too, and he went out with us, and like just two lieutenants fresh out of IOC, and this guy just could not keep up. So we had to slow down for him, which was a little amusing, but just like trying to pick his brain for anything we could about like what it was going to be like to actually get in front of a platoon and do that. And then my platoon got back, and it was kind of weird. So a bunch of my squad leaders went off to squad leaders course as soon as they got back. My platoon sergeant went off to advanced course, maybe. He went off to school for something. So I didn't even I met my platoon sergeant for like a day, and then he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went out and did a couple field ops where I had a sergeant that was waiting to execute orders is basically my acting platoon sergeant, and a couple like corporals and lance corporals that had fleeted up to be squad leaders for the first couple field ops. So that was interesting. I did get lost on my first field op.
Oh, really? Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, and it's even worse. So it was, we were over by like OP5, that area.
Yep.
And we'd done, I forget how we'd gotten there exactly, but we were over there, and we were supposed to move over to Fox 18, which is another range along Camp Lejeune. And you kind of follow Sneeds Ferry Road by the ASP to get to it. And so my company commander basically pulled the platoon commanders in. He's like, all right, I'm basically going to time you getting to Fox 18 and see who gets there with the fastest time. He's like, I don't care if you take tank trails, do whatever you got to do, just get there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, roger that. So I'm like, hey, we're just going to go down the trails, guys, and haul ass. And so we jump on the tank trail. Well, the map that we had at the time did not reflect. It reflected the tank trail, or it showed the tank trail going all the way down 172 or Sneeds Ferry Road, whichever it is, all the way to the range.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what happened. It bangs a hard right. There's a landfill over there by like Piney Green Road.
Oh yeah.
It bangs a right and heads off towards the impact area. And so we're going, and we make the sharp right. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. It's not on the map. We keep going and keep going, and now I'm like, crap. I hope I didn't get us lost. Like, oh man. And
Damn it.
So finally, after a while, I just got to swallow. Yeah, I got to swallow my pride and stop. And I was up at the lead. I grabbed my first squad leader because I knew the sergeant, my acting platoon sergeant, had added GPS previously on that field op.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, hey, go ask Sergeant Richardson for his GPS so I can check, see where we are. Because not many people had GPSs back then.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't even have my own personal one at the time. So he goes back to the platoon sergeant in the back, and he comes back. He's like, hey, Sergeant Richardson said he doesn't have his GPS. I'm like, that's weird. I could have sworn he had it. Like, all right. I mean, I guess at this point there's nothing to do but just turn around and go back to the road and find our way back. So we double back, hit the road, and get back and link up with everybody else. And I get a little bit of ribbon for being the last platoon in, whatever. But God, it must have been several months later, if not a year later. I was talking to that same squad leader. The sergeant had moved on. He'd gone on to whatever orders he had. I don't remember where he went after that. But I was talking to the squad leader. He's like, hey, by the way, Sergeant Richardson has GPS the whole time. I was like, what? He said, yeah. I went back and I said, hey, Lieutenant, wants your GPS? And he said, nah, we're going to let him learn.
Hey, man, good life lessons, right?
Yeah, I never got lost again, man. So that was my one time. It was kind of stupid because I was trying to cheat and take the easy way.
Those tank trails.
And I learned my lesson. but never ever got lost again. Always knew where I was from that point on.
Land nav in Camp Lejeune sucks too, for those that don't know, because it's so flat. Like you can't
Yeah.
look at, oh look, there's a mountain that way, so let's do a resection, and now this is where we're at. You're like looking for roads and like any kind of like water or something like that that might be on the map, or tank trails and stuff. So if your map's not up to date, yeah, that sucks, man.
Yeah, it's all pine trees, so you can't see anything. You can't see landmarks.
So yeah, for sure. So you got to the fleet in 2002. Obviously September 11th had already happened. That occurred. What was like the kind of the scuttlebutt, if you will, around the battalion at that point about you guys possibly deploying and stuff? And then at what point did you find out you were deploying?
So actually, back up a little bit. When I was in TBS, like right after I got selected to be an infantry officer, I had gone back to VMI. The Marine Department does every fall and summer they have an FTX where you basically take a long weekend and all the ROTC departments go out and do various things related to that service. So the Army goes and does a field op. The Marines, it's about the only time the Marine Department actually goes to the field is during that FTX. So I went out to that FTX basically to be like a TAC instructor for that were going out. They split them up into two platoons. They gave them blanks for their M14s and just went out and ran patrols and ran force on force against the other platoon. And so my buddy and I went down there, and I went with one platoon and he went with the other. And I was talking to the MOI, who was a recon guy, and he kept trying to hint like, "Hey, there's things coming." And he'd been a 1st Marine Division guy for a while, so he was like trying to talk us into going to 1st Marine Division. And I didn't listen to him, because at the time, before the war kicked off, like the East Coast units were the ones that were doing all the interesting stuff. They were going on the Meuse and going to Kosovo and Liberia and that kind of stuff. So I was sold on doing an East Coast MEU, and he was trying to hint like, "Hey, things are coming. You might want to look at going to 1st Marine Division." And I just didn't listen to him at all. So obviously he knew the way things were blowing. This was post 9/11. This was April 2002 that he was kind of hinting at that. So I'm sure some of his contacts, he actually got pulled out of MOI duty early to go back to 1st Recon Battalion to be their XO for the invasion.
Oh, cool.
So he kind of, I'm sure, was getting wind of things that were coming. And then I check into 2-8, and the battalion commander, like, he kept hinting at it. He's like, "Hey guys, like, we were slated to go to CAX in January and then go UDP in June." And he kept hinting at it like, "Hey guys, like, I don't think that's our future. I think something else is coming." And I remember, like, we left for, we did several field ops, and we went on Christmas leave, and we were supposed to go to CAX when we got back. And I remember him right before we went on leave, like, "Hey man, I wouldn't plan on going to California, guys." But that was kind of about all that we got. It was like, "Hey, we're going to CAX, and then you're going to Okinawa for UDP." And then we went home on leave, and then we got recalled off of leave. I can't remember. I think it was a couple days after Christmas. Like, I got a phone call at my parents' house, like, "Hey, you need to get back to Camp Lejeune now." So we got recalled back off of leave, and had to go start packing up and get ready to load the ships to head over to Kuwait.
What's that like to get recalled? Because that's a fear a lot of people have, especially guys that come off the MEU and stuff when they're still part of the global response force. What goes through your head when you get that phone call and they're like, "Hey, we're getting recalled," and it's like for real?
Yeah, I was young and dumb. Like, I was excited, like, "Oh, hey, this is it. Like, we're gonna go do this." Like, everybody kind of knew that things were building up towards something in Iraq, and it's like, "Oh, I guess we're going to go do this." Like, my parents, I'm sure, would give you a completely different reaction.
I was going to say, how'd the family react, and could you tell them what you were getting recalled for?
Not really. I mean, we didn't really know a whole lot. It was just, "Hey, get back here." They didn't give us any details on why we were going back. I mean, you could obviously kind of put 2 and 2 together and figure out it's probably going overseas. Come to find out, so there's a good book, Marines in the Garden of Eden, that talks all about Task Force Tarawa, which is the MEV that deployed from the East Coast for OIF 1. And he interviewed a lot of the key players, like the MEV CG, General Antonsky, and the RCT commander, and everybody else. So he got to see a lot, or at least in the interviews find out about a lot of the stuff that went on behind the scenes that didn't make its way down to Second Lieutenant Benbow. So come to find out, our battalion was slated to deploy, but we were going to fly over and attach to 1st Marine Division and actually be part of RCT-7 for the invasion. And so when the East Coast started planning for this, Task Force Tarawa, the 2nd Med, to float over, they put together this, it was basically the Marine Corps wanting to like show what we could do with amphibious shipping and so on. So they made a campaign. We're going to deploy this brigade aboard ships to get over there to show that we can do it. So the East Coast put this force together, and at some point, General Natonsky and Colonel Bailey went to bat and said, "Hey, we want 2-8 to deploy with us on the ships just to get over there, so that we can say we deployed a full, brigade essentially." And then come to find out, they had like a hidden motivation. They figured that they wanted 2-8 to be part of Task Force Tarawa. At the time, they only had 2 battalions for the task force, and they wanted a 3rd battalion. And so they figured if we can get 2-8 on the ships with us, possession's 9/10 of the law, we can probably sell the math on just giving 2-8 to us. And sure enough, that's what happened. But it was around Christmas time that the change happened, where they said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to deploy 2-8 on ship," and that's why we got recalled.
That's
to come back.
Do you think your higher command, or not your high? Well, do you think like your battalion commander and stuff knew before you went on leave that you guys were going to be deploying, and it was kind of like, well, let's just let them go?
Yeah, I don't know. That'd be a good question for him if I ever get a chance to drink a beer with him. He's a really good guy. I'd love to know that. I don't honestly know. I would suspect. I think when we left, I don't think he knew. I think maybe he knew the discussions were happening, but I don't think the decision had been made.
How did the like attitudes of everyone or the environment change? Like when you guys all came back, and now you're like, shit, we're like preparing to go to actual combat. Like this is like for real now.
I think there was some excitement. Obviously, like guys, Marine Corps hadn't seen a lot of combat to that point since Desert Storm. Really, he'd had a few battalions that got into Afghanistan, but that was it. So there wasn't a lot of combat experience around. So a lot of guys were kind of amped. Like I remember my company commander, who was an older guy. He was prior enlisted, very like quiet, soft-spoken guy, but like, you could just kind of tell he was amped to get his first chance on the combat, leading the company. There was, I think, some disbelief. Like I remember some of especially like the salty first lieutenants who were like, "Yeah, this is like we're going to go over there, but this war will never kick off. Like they're not going to get the authorization to actually do this." I mean, we were on the ground in Kuwait. And I remember guys still saying like, "This isn't going to happen. We're just going to sit here forever and wait and never go." But yeah, that was kind of the attitude. Like I was kind of pumped. Like, "Hey, this is what I signed up for, man. It's happening like right away."
How long were you guys in Kuwait for? And what did you guys do in preparation for pushing in while you were in Kuwait?
So we floated over for about a month. I was on the Kearsarge on the float over. We obviously did a lot of drills on the ship. We did a lot of this was before the combat marksmanship program was a thing. But our battalion gunner had been with the anti-terrorism MEB and had been a security forces guy. So he had designed a program that he called EMP, which you may have heard of. EMP became kind of a Marine Corps wide thing. For a while, it was kind of like the unofficial CMP, that everybody did it. Like you were required to do it pre-deployment.
What did that stand for? Do you remember EMP?
Enhanced Marksmanship Program. So it had basically been put together. Like he just took a bunch of his security forces experience and put together this manual, this EMP manual. And so we learned some of that before we went, and then we did a bunch of like dry fire drills and magazine change drills and that kind of stuff in the hangar bay. Orders classes and what are those? The TDGs. A lot of that kind of stuff. Like we did map drills. We still thought we were going to attach to RCT-7, and so we knew RCT-7 had a mission. More like TDGs, but we were still going over it and like talking about our plans for seizing some Kearsarge. And so it was just super crowded on that ship. It seemed like it was like no lieutenant colonel left behind.
Yeah.
There were 70, there were like 75 field grade officers
What?
on board the
Really?
ship, just Marines. Oh yeah. So like the lieutenants and
Yeah.
the overflow berthing on
Oh, I
LHD
know.
that's down by the mess deck. Yeah, that's where the lieutenants and staff sergeants
Really?
live
That's
together.
crazy.
Yeah, there was no room for the lieutenants on the O2 level where all the officers live.
Wow.
The company commanders were in the 6-man staterooms where normally like the
Yep.
lieutenants live.
So everybody was suffering on
So
that ship,
yeah, it
huh?
was
Damn.
that was jam packed. I mean, my Marines like the troop berthing was better than what we were living in down in overflow. So
Yeah. Well, at least you guys
uh,
were only on it for a
but
month, you know?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we got off ship. We flew in on 46s into Kuwait, and the camp in Kuwait was called Camp Shoop. Shoop was a former Second Marines regimental commander during Tarawa. He got the Medal of Honor
Mm-hmm.
during the Battle of Tarawa. So the RCT for RCT2 occupied Camp Shoop. So all the infantry battalions were in there. And it was basically just like a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer square patch of desert that they like bermed up around, and they put a
Yeah.
bunch of GP tents in the middle. No showers, no hot chow, no cots. You know, you're just sleeping in the sand inside the tent. Um, and I remember one of the other lieutenants talking about it. Like we all kind of assumed that there was going to be just like this mountain of ammunition, and you just every day go grab a bunch of bullets and go out and train. It definitely was not that. Like we did a lot of just non-live fire training, run around the desert. We went out. We at one point tried to dig like a trench system to practice clearing trenches, and you find out real quick that in Kuwait, like you think it's this nice soft sand. It's soft sand for about an inch, and then
Really?
it's just rock hard underneath, and just could not dig this trench system to save our lives. My company commander tasked my platoon to go dig this thing. And, we spent a couple hours just chipping away at it. Couldn't get anything done. We finally got a CB to bring a bulldozer over. He couldn't scrape down, but he was able to scrape enough of the surface layer up to make kind of a berm, and that became our little trench system to practice
Man,
trench
what
clearing.
a it's you don't have to imagine because you've done it, but for the listeners, like imagine
Yeah,
practicing trench clearing, knowing that like that it could be something you actually do here, in the near future. Like it's not again, it's hard for people
yeah,
to it's hard for people that have never, I guess, have never been in on a deployment like a combat deployment or something like that to understand the mindset of when the training starts to become real and you're like, holy shit, like this isn't like fun with my
yeah,
homies like blowing stuff up and shooting at the range anymore. This is like legitimately someone else could be shooting back here pretty soon. And it just kind of
yeah.
shifts the mindset a little bit, or at least it did for me. I mean, I'm assuming you saw the same thing.
Yeah, it didn't really hit until we actually got to Nasiriyah.
Yeah.
We didn't shoot that much in the desert in Kuwait. We did some, we found out we were going to be mounted in 7 tons driving into Iraq, so we were invading another country in 7 tons, which is awesome. Uh, so we were trying to figure out how to fortify the 7 tons, like put sandbags along the side. We didn't have the armadillo armored
Yeah.
backs that they have now, so we were filling sandbags and trying to like figure ways to use pallets to hold them up, so that they make kind of an armored
Mm-hmm.
side, for lack of a better term. And we go out and we do some drills, like driving around the desert, like practicing how to navigate. Um, I remember we did one where our cap platoon commander was having a really hard time, like just navigating us across the desert. And I had my little Garmin GPS, so I was just tracking as we crossed grid lines. But did some of that, and then a couple of days prior, like we started getting ready. We moved out to the assembly area, I think the day before we crossed the border. We actually had a scud alarm go off right before we left, so we had to mask up and ride in our gas masks up to the assembly area. Spent a couple hours in gas masks until the all clear got sounded.
What's it like to be in a gas mask
And
for a couple hours? I've never had mine on for more than maybe an hour. I think we did some longer training at Fort Bragg one time, but I think most of the time it's only a couple
yeah,
minutes when you're wearing it.
I mean, about like you expect, like it sucks.
When is this over?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't long enough, but yeah, it's it wasn't. I mean, it was March, so it wasn't that
Mm-hmm.
hot. What and it wasn't long enough that I had to worry about any of the. Like, I don't even think I drank out of my canteen, like using the little hose
Straw,
to drink
yeah.
canteen. So it wasn't that bad. We were in mop suits by that point.
Yeah, that's the what is it? Mission oriented protective posture, or the big rubber
Yep.
suits and stuff like that, which is kind of famous for, the invasion, because everyone had the woodland mop suits on for
Yeah.
a lot of it, because that's what they, at the time they had in inventory, and then everyone shedded that, once they realized that the chemical agents weren't being used or going to be used, and shedded that, just
Yep.
were in regular camis. So when you guys got the actual order to march, what was that like? What were you like? You're a brand new lieutenant. Not brand new at this point anymore. But what, have you been in the fleet for about a year or something? So I guess still kind of brand new. But
Yeah.
what was that like?
Not even. I've been in the
Go
fleet
ahead.
6 months at
Okay,
that
6
point.
months. Yeah. So what was going through your mind is like, holy shit, I'm about to actually go lead men in combat.
I mean, pretty much that. Like our battalion commander brought the battalion in and gave a speech. He was a pretty good speaker as battalion commanders went. Not like some who gets breaks out all the the thesaurus and gets all the big words. Like he really knows how to speak to and motivate the Marines and
Mm-hmm.
kind of be at their level. Um, so he gave a pretty good speech. I don't remember much of the speech, but there's pictures of the battalion gathered around him for it, and we just mounted up and went. Like I don't it maybe because everything else later was uh, more significant. It doesn't stand out that much to me.
Okay. So you want to kind of talk
Excuse me.
about your guys'
Sorry.
role in the invasion then, and what you personally did?
Yeah, sure. So Task Force Tarawa, like as the MEF, like we worked directly for the MEF, like we were adjacent to First Marine Division, and really our job, we were kind of supposed to kind of pull up the rear and be the line of the LOC, or line of communication security, for First Marine Division as they march north. So kind of keep the highways open behind First Marine Division. But where it got a little weird is when we first crossed in, I think initially kind of either paralleled the division or pushed up a little bit ahead, and we were supposed to block this city called Nasiriyah, where you had several highways that crossed over, and there was an Iraqi division headquartered there, and so we were just kind of supposed to block. First Marine Division continued along, I think it was Highway 1. They were supposed to go up to the Highway 1 and Highway 8 crossing just to the west of Nasiriyah. I think we were actually supposed to secure it and then pass control of it to First Marine Division. And so that was kind of it. Like we heard about Nasiriyah, but not much. Like I couldn't even find out what the composition of the buildings were. Like people didn't know a whole lot about it. We just knew we were going to this place called Nasiriyah. And so we started rolling north. We spent 3 days rolling through the desert. And as we got closer to Nasiriyah, as 3-2 pushed over to try to get to that highway interchange to secure it, the Army had already secured it, and they were going to go take it over from the Army and then hold it until First Marine Division got there. They hit a massive traffic jam with all the Army, ass and trash that they bring along, and so they just got snarled in traffic for hours. Matter of fact, I think the first casualty from Task Force Tarawa was a kid that died in a rear end collision in this
Really?
traffic jam.
That,
Yeah, I don't know if he was the first, but I think he was. It happened before the battle, but so that's going on, and I guess at some point in the middle of the night, the MEF decides, or First Marine Division decides, they want to open up another movement corridor on the north side of Nasiriyah, on the north side of the Euphrates River. So Nasiriyah has the Euphrates River that comes through the south side, and then it's got it's called the Saddam Canal, which is basically a river on the north side. And then it's got a couple highways that go through it. Highway 8 crosses south, and you've got Highway 7 that goes through. And then there's one part, it's not really part of Highway 7, but there's a road that kind of skirts the eastern portion of Nasiriyah and crosses both rivers, and then links back up with Highway 7. And that was what they decided was where we were going to push through and secure a route for RCT-1 to pass through our lines, and then they would open up another axis of advance on the north side of the Euphrates River. and then start pushing towards Baghdad. So they apparently decided in the middle of the night to do that. And so the orders got kind of confused as they made their way down to the battalions. But they tasked 1-2, which was our only mechanized battalion in the task force, to seize these 2 bridges. And then 2-8 was going to follow behind because 3-2 had pushed off to the west side of the city to go secure that highway interchange. So 2-8 was going to follow in support of 1-2 and eventually relieve them on the bridges. And that's where the whole Battle of Nasiriyah happened. Like it was, as they were getting ready for this, nobody noticed this Army convoy barrel by and drive into
Can you?
The 507.
Oh, I lost you there for a second. Can you start over? I heard you say nobody noticed the Army convoy barrel by, and then I lost you.
Yeah, that was what everybody kind of knows it as the Lynch convoy, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
The 507th Maintenance Company that drove by, and the confusion. The company commander had gotten lost, didn't know where he was supposed to turn, and basically drove into the city. Drove all the way through Nasiriyah, like made it all the way through Ambush Alley and out the north side. The Iraqis were so surprised that they didn't even open fire. But then when they got on the north side, they figured out that they'd screwed up and they started trying to turn around and get back. Mm-hmm. And that's when the Iraqis started kind of figuring out what was going on and opening fire. And then and it just became a just giant mess as they tried to get back. They started losing people, losing vehicles on the way back, and they just ended up losing vehicles and people all through the city. And I think only like four or five vehicles out of the entire convoy made it all the way back to the south side. Meanwhile, 1-2 is on the south side, staging for their attack. They've got a company of tanks with them, and they were prepping to go seize the first bridge with this company of tanks. And their plan was to seize the first bridge, cross over the Euphrates, and then they were going to bust out. It looked like on the map there was a bunch of open terrain on the east side of the city. And so instead of driving through Ambush Alley, they were going to push out to the east into this open ground and head up north to the second bridge that way, kind of bypass the built-up area. So they're planning for this, and then the remains of this Army convoy rolls in. The company commander comes driving in, screaming in and saying, "Hey, I got people left back in the city." Basically, according to General Task, the guy was pretty much panicking. And so they immediately launch into the attack. Like they tell Alpha Company, the tanks, with some infantry to just push up there and go rescue these guys. Mm-hmm. And so they roll in, they hit some Iraqi T-55s, make pretty short work of those, but they start burning through fuel and ammo pretty quick going through this. And they rescue some of the survivors from the 507th. Pull those guys out, but in the time the tanks start running low on fuel.
Can you say all that?
And so
all that was really garbly. Can you say that again?
Ah, crap. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. You said that they had pulled out some survivors from the 507th, and then what happened after that?
Yeah, the tanks were low on fuel and ammo after that, so they pushed back south to go resupply. And 1-2 got kind of left with a decision: hey, do we wait for the tanks to come back to kick off this attack, or do we just push with what we got? They had they'd done some cross attaching, so they had a platoon of tanks that was attached to one of their infantry companies. If for listeners who aren't familiar with it, we do that a lot. We'll take if you've got a company of tanks and a company of infantry, a lot of times you'll take a platoon of tanks and put it with the infantry to give them some more firepower, and you'll put a platoon of infantry with the tanks so that they've got some infantry to help protect the tanks.
How many tanks is a platoon of tanks?
It's a platoon is 4 tanks, and then a company I think is about 14 when you include the company commander and the XOs tanks. So they ended up deciding to push into the attack without the tanks. Their cap platoon went up and I think destroyed some more tanks, some more T-55s on the south end, and then Alpha Company that my buddy was in went up and secured the southern bridge, and then Bravo Company, which was the company that had the platoon of tanks, pushed across the bridge, and they turned out into the open terrain. And what nobody knew at the time was that when you get into those, the green zones in Iraq around the rivers, like you've got hard, you've got a hard surface, but it only goes down a few inches, and it's all just mud underneath. And a 70-ton tank and a 40 ton Amtrak, whatever those things weighed, is going to break through that pretty quick. And so they got out into the open terrain, and they broke through into the mud pretty quickly, and just got sunk into the mud and got stuck there. And started taking some pretty heavy fire, and that's where the whole situation developed with the friendly fire. So the plan was Bravo Company would go around the east side and push north and secure the second bridge. They had a lot of comm issues once they got out off of ambush out off the highway. So they couldn't talk to anybody. There are a lot of, obviously you've been in Iraq, you've seen the power lines that are strung everywhere. So they were having a lot of comm issues, and Charlie Company rolls across the southern bridge. They don't see Bravo Company anywhere because they're off in the built-up area to the east. They can't talk to the battalion. And they knew the company commander knew that their guidance was to push, like to secure the bridges as quickly as possible. And so he figured that Bravo Company must have just gone straight up the highway. So he says, all right, let's just push. And they drive straight up Ambush Alley. And they just start taking a ton of fire as they drive through. Like they have tracks getting hit with RPGs. I think they had one get disabled in the middle of the city, and they kept pushing north. They made it across the Saddam Canal and secured the northern bridge. But the other thing, and this is in Richard Lowry's book, which is pretty interesting, the Iraqi commander had kind of built a 360 defense, but the guy that was defending to the north had for some reason thought that the Americans were most likely to send the airborne and jump into, do an airborne drop somewhere north of Nasiriyah and attack from the north. So he built this whole defense facing north along this road intersection. Charlie Company basically drove into his engagement area from the wrong direction, but they came to a stop right in the middle of his engagement area. And he had mortars laid in, I don't know if you had pre-park. It seemed like you had everything laid in. And so they just started taking a ton of fire. And from what I've heard from guys that were there, like their mortar section, their 60 mortar section got into a duel with an Iraqi mortar section, and basically seeing who could adjust on first, and they basically lost. They got hit. A lot of the casualties actually came from Charlie Company's mortar section.
Damn, man, that's so crazy.
So, and then somewhere in there, so the Charlie Company didn't have a FAC with them. This is obviously interesting to me now as a JTAC of like, they didn't have a FAC with that company because at the time there were no JTACs. It was all FACs. So for the listeners, like Ford Air Controller is basically a JTAC who's an aviator. In the modern terms, back then it didn't exist. You only had FACs. You only had aviators who were trained to control air. And each battalion only had 3. And generally, one of them was going to be your air officer that was in the battalion command post. And then you'd have 2 companies that had a FAC. And then one company just managed without. And usually that company was always kind of your supporting effort number 2, right? Like you didn't put them in the lead since they didn't have a FAC. But in this case, like things just kind of happened. And suddenly Charlie Company with no FAC is in the lead and rolls up north, and the battalion doesn't know they're up there. And the FAC with Bravo Company gets a section A-10s on station and has lost comm with the battalion air officer. At some point, the battalion did get comms and learned that Charlie Company was up north, but they never told Bravo Company. And so the Bravo Company FAC starts working these A-10s, not knowing that Charlie Company's up north. And the A-10s report a bunch of armored vehicles. They don't have targeting pods back then, so they're using binos out of the cockpit to look, and they're staying up at high altitude because there were some reports of air defense assets, but they see armored vehicles along the road to the north, and so he clears them Type 3 on these armored vehicles to the north.
Yeah.
And so they start rolling in, and obviously he cleared them Type 3 on Charlie Company. And they start rolling in on those guys.
So for those that don't know what a Type 3 control is, that means the aircraft is given normally you give them a time window like a 10-minute
Yeah.
time window or whatever. And within that time window, they can attack any targets that they see or deem as being aggressive. So, and another thing that we forget, and I'm glad you pointed out the targeting pod thing, is technology in 2020, even now, some of the pods aren't like perfect or anything like that. Now you're talking 20 years ago and the kind of technology they had where these, if they did have a pod, a lot of the times they just kind of look like blobs. They're not necessarily distinguishable as like, oh, that's definitely an American vehicle compared to an Iraqi vehicle. So it was a really hard. The advent of smart weapons or of these like precision guided weapons make people think that these kind of situations shouldn't occur or should be done with. But it's like, it doesn't matter. The technology, I don't know if the technology will ever override the confusion that is caused in the moment of being like in that moment. That's only because you can't predict that. It's hard to predict these kind of confusing things that happen. Someone moves into an area that you don't know about. It's just it's an unfortunate situation. I had known that they had taken the 810 fire and took a lot of casualties from that as well, a few casualties from that. And I did not know, though, that they were out dueling with mortars and shooting back and forth with mortars. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. That's, man, I just can't imagine being in that kind of situation. That's crazy.
Yeah, like I said, I've heard that they basically lost a mortar duel. It could have been RPGs, but something took out a good chunk of the weapons platoon, most of the mortar section. I mean, the weapons platoon sergeant was killed. And the weapons platoon commander was pretty severely wounded.
Man.
Most of the mortar section was taken out, and so a lot of the mortarmen were wounded and got loaded into this track to get evac back south to the casualty collection point, which was down by the southern bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of tracks take off south across the bridge, and the A-10s report, "Hey, I got armored vehicles heading south across the bridge." And so naturally, the Bravo Company FAC, knowing what he knew at the time, okay, I got armored vehicles coming south at me, and he tells him, I forget the exact terminology he used, but he basically authorized them to engage, and they put a Maverick into one of those tracks that was loaded with wounded.
Man.
And there's been a lot of debate. Like the Air Force went back and basically said that they couldn't determine that was what killed those Marines, but a lot of people, especially a lot of the Marines, are of the opinion that Maverick killed a lot of the Marines that died that day.
That attack, that whole thing has left a bad taste in people's mouths for close air support and for A-10s in general. We love A-10s, and everyone, you see it on social media, everyone loves A-10s, everyone loves Hog coming in, they like the sound of the gun and shit. Yeah. But there's been multiple instances where A-10s have done blue on blue, have struck friendly forces. And that, because of that, it's left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. I actually worked with I don't remember his name, on my second MU deployment. The BLT commander was in Nasiriyah, and I'm not sure which company he was with. But we were doing a training exercise in Saudi Arabia with Cobras, and he had come out to watch us, and we also had maneuver elements out in front of us. LAR had guys out there, and we were running Cobra rocket and gun attacks perpendicular, to the flot, or parallel with the flot, like you know what I'm saying, across the front where I'm trying to explain it so people don't know what I'm talking about. The forward line of troops, they were running along that, so the effects wouldn't short or long go into the friendly forces. Oh, he got pretty upset of how close we were to his LAVs with Cobras, and we kind of got into it a little bit on the hill, and he made the gunner go back and do some research to see that we were actually being safe, which we were. We were actually safer than what the gunner said. The gunner was like, you could have actually brought it in a little tighter if you wanted. But he was like, this dude was in Nasiriyah, and he has kind of like he has that. That's obviously something that he is in the back of his mind anytime there's close air support going on near his troops now. And I can't blame him, for an incident like that. So
yeah, I was well south. I didn't really have any good friends in that company, but it was probably about 10 years before I had a really positive experience with the A-10 community. Even in my time as a JTAC, I went to TSP school in 2006, mm-hmm. So 3 years after this, and it still took a while before I came around to the A-10 community.
It is
just kind of
go ahead.
they just do things different,
Yeah.
you know,
They they
from what we're used
they
to.
want to run the whole control, and that's something that when I
Yeah,
was at First Anglico, we would go out to Gila Bend all the time, and you can get a lot of A10 work out there. And
yeah,
for controllers that were coming out there with us, we tell them, be like, hey man, this isn't a Marine Corps aircraft. They're not gonna do the work like a Marine Corps aircraft is going to. There's gonna be some things that you need to be prepared for. Like they're not gonna give readbacks from both aircraft. They just you can either sit there and have a 5-minute argument over the radio about why they're not going to do it, or just accept for the fact that they're not going to do it. And they will also try to basically take control of everything. I remember the controller was like, hey man, your final attack headings are this. And he gave them like a 30-degree cone or whatever, kind of a standard cone. And the A10 guy was like, hey man, I don't really like those final attack headings. Looking for east to west or west to east, plus or minus 180 degrees. Basically saying, and that's literally what he said. And we're like, dude, we're not retarded. Like, what are you talking about, dude? And it's just a different, they want you to tell them where the target is and where you're at, and just you get off the radio and let them do the work. And that's just not how the Marine Corps works, especially because we pride ourselves on these combined arm attacks where, hey man, I'm going to bring you in with the A10, but I'm also going to have mortar shooting over here, maybe artillery shooting over there. So there's a reason behind these restrictions and these timelines and these things that I'm giving you. And I think people outside of the Marine Corps fire support community, it's harder for them to understand because they don't really practice that like we do. That's like a constant for us, where for them, that's like the exception.
yeah. They ended up kind of pinning this whole incident, the blame for it on the FAC, which, so one of the things, like, type 2 and 3 control were new at this point. Like I'd never even heard of it. For the listeners, like type 1 control is the standard, like you see the target, you see the aircraft, and the aircraft sees the target. Like everybody can see everything, and it's kind of like the standard, like I'm looking at him and I assess his nose geometry before I clear him hot. And that's all that we had ever learned about before the war. You didn't really train to use PGMs in close air support. I mean, I'd only had the training I got at TBS and IOC. I went at JTAC at this point, but everything was oriented around unguided ordnance, the standard, like he does a pop, he rolls in, wings level, cleared hot, that kind of stuff. Type 2 is more for like PGMs, but you're not required to see the aircraft, or the aircraft's not required to see the target, or the JTAC's not required to see the target. So a lot of times it's, guys use it a lot if they don't need to visually acquire the aircraft. It's one of the common times, but you're still clearing every attack individually. And then type 3 is all the same conditions as type 2, but now you're just giving a window of clearance, and you just continue running attacks through that window. And those had just come out. The JCAS pub had just been published right before this, I think. I don't know the exact date on it. But so most Marines were not comfortable with this idea of type 2 and 3 CAS. Didn't know what type 2 and 3 control was. And so the battalion commander had written in his operations order before the invasion that type 2 and 3 controls would only be authorized with approval from the battalion commander directly. And so this FAC never requested approval from the battalion before he gave the type 3 approval to engage, or clearance to engage. And so he got hammered a little bit for that. And then it was obviously the fog of war. Like nobody knew Charlie Company was up north, based off the A-10s. They say that they didn't know that a friendly fire had happened when they got back. So like one of the tapes got lost and one of the tapes got recorded over. So there weren't any tapes from them, which a lot of the Marines were bitter about. But my buddy that was in 1-2 was pretty bitter about that. But yeah, there was a lot of hard feelings towards the A-10 community after that. On my next deployment, I had a couple Marines in my platoon that came from Charlie Company, and we had a rocket attack one night in Afghanistan, and the A-10 responded, and those guys were not happy. Like one of them was up on an OP on a mountain, and the A-10 came over low and popped some flares over his head. He was very unhappy.
I mean, I get it, man. Like
we were yeah. We were at Bagram doing a BZO range, and the BZO range is right at the end of the flight line. Like they take off right over your head pretty much. And then the A-10 came in, and I remember one of my squad leaders going, "Hey, it's payback time, boys!" Like, whoa, stop! You know, he was just
Like,
obviously kidding,
like
but
I
it's
was
like,
saying,
whoa.
there's been multiple instances of A-10s hitting friendly forces, and a lot of that comes down to the controller too. Giving clearance when they shouldn't. And not checking the geometries, like you said, understanding the nose geometry of the aircraft. Where is he actually pointing? Where's the rounds actually going to go if he's using the gun? And excuse me, and we used to do at Gila Bend, after, if we had A-10s on, after they were done, after we had Winchestered them through the range, we'd already gone through, verified everything safe, we would have them come in and do a simulated gun run 50 meters from our position, just to
Mhm.
show the new controllers and stuff, like, hey man, when he's coming in for the attack, like that close to you, you're talking like extreme danger close. You can't tell the difference between if he's pointing at you or if he's pointing 50 meters away. So you have to make yourself visible in another way. Air panel, maybe you pop a smoke. I mean, if you're 50 meters from the enemy, they probably already know where you're at anyway. So
Yeah.
these are different tools that you got to think about, and it's I mean, working with aircraft is just such a dangerous, game. It's a dangerous
Yeah.
job, and it's one of those things that, when I was in the teaching primers and stuff, and when I was evaluating guys, it's like, dude, you have to keep in mind the seriousness of what you're doing, and even though this is training, you know, you have to treat it like it's real. If you're not hitting the correct target, imagine what that's like in real life. Like if I'm actually shooting into a city and now you're shooting the wrong target, what's he hitting? He's
Yeah.
hitting maybe an empty building, or maybe a bunch of civilians, or maybe friendly troops, and it's just a dangerous game that we play, and guys have to take it extremely serious for, and still, even when they do, and I'm not saying that those people weren't either, situations occur because of, like you said, the fog of war and stuff like that. So
Yeah. I mean, by all accounts, like talking to other, this guy, the FAC was a Hornet Wizzo, and talking to other guys who knew him, like he had a great reputation in the Hornet community, like considered a great dude.
mm-hmm.
Just went wrong that day.
Yeah, for sure.
But in the
So
meantime, so the Cobras, so we still had Mag 29 attached to us with the Cobras and Hueys, and they were just doing yeoman work up there, slaying tanks and technical vehicles and everything else. So meanwhile, we're 2-8, we're bumbling along in our 7 tons, closing up to catch up. And that's when you talk about like when it really sank in. Like, we've just been driving through the middle of nowhere for 3 days, like in the middle of the desert. Like we'd stop at night and do like a quick defense facing north,
mm-hmm.
like scratch out a little skirmisher's trench and go to sleep. And, but that was about it. But then we hit the highway and we start rolling north. And speaking of like land navigation, like I was very conscious of my land nav after
I
getting
bet.
lost on the first field op. So I was, right where that Army company commander got lost. Like I put my GPS away and just started shooting resections just to practice as we were going, and was checking with my GPS to make sure I knew where I was the whole time. And we stopped for a while, and then we get told, hey, we're going to roll north. Like 1-2's in contact. We're rolling north into the fight, and we're going to go link up and relieve them on the southern bridge,
Mm-hmm.
so that the Alpha Company can push across the bridge to relieve Charlie Company. And so we get in our 7 tons and we start rolling, and I see something burning. Like a Cobra at one point comes down down the highway, probably heading back to the FARP. But I mean, he was like, it felt like he was about to hit a 7-ton with one of his skids. Like he came screaming down the convoy, and I could see the gunner up front just pumping his fist as he went by. And so we're getting pretty amped, like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. Like, here we go into combat. And then we start rolling north, and I see something burning. And I see this burning vehicle, like, all right, man, the Cobras must have smoked something. And then we roll up on it, and I realize it's an Army LVSR, whatever they were called, the dragon wagons.
Yeah.
And it's just completely engulfed in flames. And you start seeing that, and that's when like it sank, like that's when it hit, like, oh shit,
Yeah.
this
The
is,
shooting's going both ways now.
yeah, there are Americans dead up here, and we're rolling into it. And then we rolled maybe another click north up by the Highway 7 and Highway 8 intersection. We just passed north of it, and I heard contact right, and everybody started bailing out of the trucks. And so I bailed out, and we jumped into a irrigation canal on the side and started setting up and just started scanning for threats. Wasn't a whole lot of return fire. Like I think somebody cracked some shots at us and ran away. I know, talking to my Marines in the back, one thing they said is the sandbags didn't do a damn thing. They said they saw the rounds come right through the sandbags.
Oh, geez.
But we bailed out and we started trying to figure out what was going on. And I remember, like, again, just showing how little we knew about Iraq rolling in here. I kept seeing this orange and white car driving around, and I kept thinking it was the same guy. And so I kept seeing this orange and white car coming at us from different directions, and I saw him come down this the highway off to our right, and I was like, man, if I see this guy again, I'm gonna smoke him. And we saw another one come, and at some point we decided to stop it instead, and figured out that the orange and white cars were taxis.
Yep.
And that's why they were all over the place. And so, thankfully, we didn't smoke any taxi drivers. But then we just started clearing through along the highway to reach the North Bridge. As a couple of different companies started taking contact from different areas and started having to clear our way through. We still, like, nobody really told us that there was this thing called the Saddam Fedayeen, which was this is a special Republican guard that was basically Saddam's like militia.
Mm-hmm.
They were all fanatics, like fanatically loyal to Saddam, but they were basically militia, like completely untrained. So we were expecting to face like regular Iraqi army and not a bunch of dudes in, man jammies running around doing their thing. So
yeah,
that kind of surprised us. And then they were just all over the place. So we were having to just kind of clear north through that. Not really a whole lot of contact that I remember. Just a lot of work clearing buildings. We finally reached the bridge later that night and had to set in. We had one company on the east side of the highway. We set in on the west and kind of a semicircle tied in with the river on one side and the highway on the other. A lot of confusion that night. Like they told me to set my platoon in. I set it in, and then I go to walk out in front of our lines to see like what's in front of us so I can do fields of fire. And I walk into the back of another platoon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So, and it wasn't a complete overlap, but we had my right flank was overlapping. His left flank was in front of me. And so I had to go back and talk to the XO and like argue with him, like, man, I've got Marines. I've got first platoon in front of me.
Yeah.
And so eventually we figured it out. And they're like, all right, man, just pull your platoon off the line and put them in reserve under the bridge. So we just went under the bridge and sat down in reserve. And then LAR came up. One of the LAR companies from 2nd LAR came up with their LAV-25s. And they started seeing stuff on their thermals across the river. So they ended up just shooting 25 all night long. I don't think I slept a wink all night because it was just constant 25 millimeter going off.
Yeah.
And then we got up the next morning and just kept cleared through some houses, took a little bit of sniper fire here and there. There's a couple weird instances. Like I learned a lot about fog of war that day because we went to go clear a building out in front of our lines. The company commander came out with me, and one of my Marines said he saw something. And so we got down behind cover. I'm scanning with binoculars trying to find whatever it was he saw. And I swear I see this guy. It looks like there's a guy in black, pajamas or whatever, like a white, some kind of hat on top, and it looks like he's working a machine gun. But for some reason, I just wasn't sure, and I kept scanning, but I was calling it out like, hey, I think I see a guy with a machine gun. Looks like he might be working on it. And I keep watching it, and trying to make sure it's at what I think it is. My company commander gets tired of it, and I think he eventually just puts a SMAW into the house next to like a couple hundred meters away. But eventually I figured out I'm not looking at a person at all. It's like a reed or something that was blowing in the wind. And my brain had completely fooled itself into thinking it was a person.
Those mind games, man, that's just real,
Yeah, it really taught me like what perception can do. Like I was expecting to see a bad guy out there, so my brain filled in the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what held me back, to keep trying to confirm it was what I thought it was. Like I said, my company commander got eventually just kind of like, all right, we're just going to put a SMAW into this house. And so he brings the SMAW team up, puts a SMAW, which is a 83 millimeter rocket, into this house, and then we run up to clear it afterwards. And I go in with the squad that goes to clear it, and we pop out the backside, and there are Marines along the river. Like we came out facing the river, and there's a line of Marines along the river that are looking back over their shoulder at us, just mouths open, like not knowing. like I had no idea they were there. They weren't. I think they were from First Recon Battalion. They weren't even from 2-8, I think. Uh, and so like I like grabbed my Kevlar, started waving it over my head, trying to signal them we were friendly. That was probably the one time I was convinced I was about to get shot. Uh, but that was that worked out. Like thankfully, they didn't turn around and open fire. We settled into kind of a defense there. Started running some patrols. We had that big. You probably heard about the big sandstorm that rolled through. Like we had just a torrential downpour roll through that night. Might have been our second night there, and it just dumped on us. Like I didn't think would happen in Iraq. I remember as we were packing everything up back at Camp Lejeune, and one of the other lieutenants was like, "Hey, do you think I should get all my smart cards laminated?" And I remember saying, like, "Dude, we're going to the place that gets like the least annual rainfall in the world. Like, don't worry about it." And then we just get this like monsoon hit us that
Dun,
night.
dun, dun. Yeah.
And my Marines were dug in along this irrigation canal. Like the way it was set up, they had to dig in on the far side of the canal on the enemy side because there was a berm on that side that they had to dig into. And so I was like, well, crap, like we can't see. Like if I were the enemy, this is when I would attack. So I better go walk the lines and just see how everybody's doing. And so I go out into this rain, and I remember just clawing my way along the bank of this irrigation canal, trying to get from one position to the next, and like scared to death I was going to slide into the bottom of this canal and drown.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like I check on one guy and I go, and I know there's supposed to be another guy at this position, and I get there and I don't see anything, and I'm looking around, I can't see anything, there's nobody there, and I yell out, like, "Hey, Bacchus, where the hell are you?" And like this guy just kind of rises up out of the mud. Hey sir, what's up?
That's funny.
uh, so I mean that goes by, nothing happens at night. Come to find out, I mean, as we all know now, like the Iraqis don't fight in the rain and nighttime, and they don't get out and fight when it's hard.
Yeah.
So you go back in, like I had my platoon CP kind of set up in a house with a courtyard, and so we were set up in, like with the radio in the courtyard. And that morning I decided, like, hey, I'm going to take a patrol out, like right at stand two, which is in the infantry, like generally right at dusk. You always wake everybody up and go to 100% security because that's a competent enemy. That's when he's most likely to attack because
Mm-hmm.
it's the hardest time to see. It's when everybody's alertness is usually the lowest. So infantry always kind of wakes up early before dawn, and we do stand to where everybody's awake. So I went to go check the lines, and I was going to run a patrol right at stand to out in front of our lines. And I remember one of my platoon commanders saying, "Hey, you better come over here to my CP and do some coordination before you take this patrol out." So, all right, Roger, I'll come over. And I grab my radio operator, and we step out. We go through the gate from the courtyard of the house out into the area where everybody's dug in. And I make it 3 steps from the house, and I get completely lost. Like 3 steps, that far, because we were socked in by fog. You couldn't see the hand in front of my face.
That's crazy.
And as I'm like turning around, trying to figure out where I am, I get disoriented. So now I don't know which way to get back to the house. And there's a machine gun position right along the road where it crosses the canal. I don't want to wander in front of those guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Because everybody's trigger happy. I don't want to stumble into the canal. So I'm like, oh shit, now what? And so I call my platoon sergeant on our little inter squad radios. It's like, hey, I need you to come out to the door and shine your pack. Why? Because I don't know where I am. So he comes out, shines his pack, and all right, okay, you're like 3 feet away.
That's funny.
And we walk inside, and I call the company like, yeah, we're not doing that patrol.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm like, why aren't we going on patrol? Like, you walk out there and tell me you want to go on patrol.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. That's crazy.
So,
the weather.
yeah,
it's weird how the weather does that to you. It's something like that you don't even realize. And you
Yeah.
were probably there in like the end of the rainy season and stuff for Iraq,
Yeah.
right before all that shit burns off and everything.
Well, dude, Nasiriyah was like, I mean, it looked more like Vietnam than what you expected Iraq to look like, too. Big
Yeah.
palm trees everywhere, the big date palm groves.
Yeah,
It was a lot more green than I expected. Like the fact that we were in green mop suits actually worked.
yeah. That's I didn't spend any real time on the ground in Iraq. I was like on bases because I was a mechanic at the time. But I've been told that it's like Afghanistan. You know, if there's like a river or something like that, you get some pretty lush areas, and it's like thick tree lines, and you know, those are like the scary places to go too, because you can't see dug in fighting positions and things like that. The misconception that Iraq and these other countries are all just like big open deserts like you see on the movies of these big sand dunes and stuff is kind of comical, I guess, once you've been there a couple times, especially.
Yeah. Yeah, we ended up pulling up, like first recon pulled in that I think the next night. They were originally going to try to tie into our lines. I'm pretty sure I met, if you've seen Generation Kill, I'm pretty sure I met Captain America that night. Because I remember this captain coming over to talk to me about tying in my lines, and I remember thinking, man, this guy's an idiot.
That's funny.
Although, like if you've ever read One Bullet Away by Nate Fick, like I've never read the entire book, but I read the portion where they were in Nasiriyah, and he describes my platoon's position to a T.
Oh, really? I'll have to go back and check it out. I have it on the bookshelf.
But he talks about like the platoon commander saying like there's snipers in the trees, man, you got to watch out. And I was like I remember telling somebody that we got shot at by a sniper, but that was about like it wasn't even really like a true sniper. Like somebody cranked around at us.
Yeah,
and that was
I think snipers don't like that we throw that term around so much. You know, it's like most of the time it's like you're facing an enemy marksman. You know, I think is a more correct way to put it, because a sniper is a highly skilled, highly trained individual, whereas most of these people are not. You know, they may have skills and stuff, and let's be honest, some of them are shooting some rickety old guns and they can do it pretty well. But I think to give them the title of a sniper is a little bit reaching too far. What kind of enemy compositions were you like faced with? Like what was like the main? Was it always, or most of the time, was it like individuals on foot carrying small arms, or were you receiving a lot of IDF and stuff like that as well?
There was some IDF. So I never on my platoon. One of the other platoons had some come down on them. Although we also had you always hear you don't fire mortars overhead of friendly positions. Like in this type of combat, like I mean, our 81's platoon commander talked about it. Like he had stakes in every direction, was firing everywhere over people's heads all the time. And after this big rainstorm, they started having a lot of short rounds. And I remember one of the other platoon commanders had a 81 round land right outside his hole.
Jeez.
Thankfully hit the mud, didn't detonate. But
that's those close calls, man. That's so crazy.
Yeah, but it was a lot of like irregular guerrilla types, the Saddam Fedayeen types, in civilian attire with AKs. They occasionally, so they pulled a couple surprises on us. Like we pulled and moved to a different position. We'd heard that there was a big attack coming, so we kind of shifted the defense to face south. So we'd heard that they'd hidden some forces and were going to come attack us from the south. And that night, our battalion main got hit. The battalion main combat or command post, excuse me, which has all our our trucks, all our 7-ton trucks for the logistics trains and everything else. And so they got attacked by an Iraqi force. But there was an LAR platoon up by the bridge, and the Iraqis apparently got in between the CP and LAR and fired on both of them. And LAR, as they were returning fire, ended up shifting fire onto the CP.
Oh my God.
And basically destroyed the entire motor pool. Wounded like 30 guys.
Holy crap, really?
If you go in 28 CP today, there's a Humvee door up on the wall that they mounted as a display, and it says it's if you ever heard of Sergeant Major Haney, retired a while back, but he's a pretty well known Sergeant Major. He was the Cap platoon sergeant at the time. He got a Silver Star, and it was a door from his Humvee, and it the plaque says that it's a 25 millimeter hole in the door. It does not mention that the Iraqis were not shooting 25 millimeter that night. So
came from their LAR homies, huh? Jeez.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah. So there was also after that some animosity between 28 and LAR.
I bet. I mean,
but while that was going on, so I think it was that night, like some dude had squirreled away a T-55 and popped out in a T-55, like behind our lines.
Oh, really?
It started playing cat and mouse with our cat platoon. So like our cat platoon's trying to find this guy in the T-55 with their toes and take him out. They eventually get him cornered somewhere and just drop DPICM on him.
Nice.
But
which is cluster bomb.
I've heard a few stories about that here and there. I know some guys thought it was BS, that there was no way. but I've talked to guys who actually saw the tank. Um, and then the Cap platoon commander, he's actually, I think, just got selected for colonel. Is a really good guy. Um, you know, tracked this thing down and killed it with DPICM.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, like his platoon sergeant was over at the main CP. You know, may not have been at the same time, but sometime around there, getting torn up by Iraqis and LAR.
Yeah.
So thankfully nobody died, but had a number of wounded. Gunny Haney actually got medevaced all the way back to Kuwait and snuck out of the cache and hitchhiked his way back to the battalion in Iraq.
Classic.
And so we got back to Kuwait at the end of the war, and he had his medical record, and he was reading. We were in line for chow, and he was reading all the entries in his medical record where they were basically like threatening him with NJP for not there.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody, you know, like the battalion commander and everybody was like, yeah, whatever. They all thought it was hilarious, and they actually put it in his award write-up that he, you know, snuck out of the hospital to rejoin the battalion.
That's one of those classic military stories that you hear, you know, of these guys. I mean, that
Yeah.
happened all the time in like World War II, where guys would sneak away from medical stuff and try to get back to their units and stuff to keep going. I'm like, that's crazy, man. And you'd think today that the way troop movements and stuff are, that it'd be harder to do, but the guys always still find a way to get out of the hospital and get back to their dudes. So good on them, man. You know, that's cool.
So the weird thing, like you asked about the type of contact we were getting, like my platoon, the company didn't take a lot of contact.
Really?
Really not. Like pot shots here and there, like no pitched firefights, none of that. A couple of the other companies had to go clear, like the military hospital, got involved with that, but we didn't really have any major firefights in our entire company. So Nasiriyah finally, we spent about 2 weeks in Nasiriyah. That kind of wraps up, and they pulled Task Force Tarawa out to start following 1st Marine Division up north and securing the highways behind them. And so we keep driving north. We eventually end up in Al Qut, which is on the Tigris River. And I think it may have even been at the fall of Baghdad, after the fall of Baghdad. Like the war was basically over when we rolled up to Al Qut. Because we had already dropped mop suits. We were back in camis at this point.
Isn't that the town that has the 2 crossed swords, like on the entry into the town?
So that's actually in Baghdad.
Okay.
So Al Qut was weird because it's somewhat close to Iran. Like all this is still Shia areas, like so somewhat affiliated with Iran. And apparently the story that we were told was that the task force leadership, like this Iranian cleric had come across and like offered to kind of take control of the town and restore order. And the task force leadership at the time was like, hey, you got it, man. Like as long as you can keep the place in line, and and you're not a Ba'athist, have at it. And so he took over, but then he quickly started implementing like a lot of strict laws. Like he started closing down barbershops and liquor shops and all that stuff. Like Iraqis like their liquor normally. They're not that. They're kind of a secular nation in general, but he started cracking down on that stuff. And then they started protesting, and the task force didn't really have they didn't bring a lot of the infantry into the city with them. They set up a forward CP and a kind of like a civil military operations center where they started distributing aid to the city, inside the city, like on the bank of the river. But they didn't bring a lot of infantry in with them for security. Well, these guys started rioting, so they sent our company into Al Qut to start providing security and kind of help tamp things down. And so the city hall, like this cleric and his guys had taken over the city hall, and they were launching protests out of there. Like they'd come by and march by and protest, and we'd go by, and they, like if we went anywhere near the compound, they'd come out and start yelling at us. And so my company commander had the idea. It's like, all right, they want to play. Like we're going to start sending a patrol by, like every 30 minutes, all night long. And so we just start all night long. We'd go by and we'd wake, and they'd come out and start yelling at us. And I kept sending patrols by. One of my squad leaders came by at like 03, and he came back. He's like, yeah, we went by. They were all asleep. He's like, I had to like start yelling at them and throwing things at them to wake them up. And then like they weren't even really getting into yelling at us.
Like, look, tomorrow, we'll get into it tomorrow.
Yeah. So we did that for like a night, and they got fed up, and they came out and started actually like rioting, like forming lines and coming at us. We had no riot control gear. So one of the other platoons was out, and they got faced with a bunch of rioters. and they fixed bayonets.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, and company commander had been very clear, like, hey, if anybody tries to take a weapon, that's lethal force. And so, sure enough, a rioter grabs a Marine's weapon, and the platoon radio operator just straight out of McMap, like sticks him
Oh shit!
with his bayonet.
No
And
way.
and they, yeah, a little bit of that going on, and they quickly decided. Like one guy got stuck. They did like one more riot to protest, like us killing the guy, um, and then they decided to pack up and leave. Um, I think they sat down for negotiation with the leadership,
Mm-hmm.
the task force leadership, and they're like, "Hey, get the hell out of town." So this guy packs up and leaves. But the problem is when he does, there's nobody keeping order anymore. So we go on patrol the next day, and I remember they got patrolling near this one building, and I see people running out of the building with stuff, and I couldn't figure out what was going on for a bit. And then I finally figured out they were looting, and I called my company commander. I was like, "Hey, we got some looters over here," and he just called back over the radio. He goes, "We'll stop them." Roger that. Okay. So I just turned to the Marines like, "Hey, go make it stop." And there was still some pent up aggression because, like I mentioned, we hadn't gotten into many firefights,
Yeah.
and man, it was just letting the dogs off the leash. Um, they just went to town and just started just absolutely going WWE SmackDown on looters. I remember watching my smallest Marine who weighed like maybe a buck 30, soaking wet, just clothesline a guy and lay him out.
Were
Um,
they stealing from each other, or were they stealing from like government
yeah,
buildings? Okay.
both. Like I saw guys like they were stealing from like a dentist's office.
Hmm.
Uh, like the Marines just started laying these guys out and just beating the crap out of them. My platoon sergeant was pepper spraying guys, uh, and it took about an hour or two of just them getting the crap beat out of them before they figured out. Like one of my squad, the same squad leader that told me about the going by the compound at night, said that he came around the corner. He saw some guys wheeling the dentist chair out of the dentist's office, and he came around the corner and they saw him and they immediately started pushing it back in the office. Um, one of my saw gunners, I saw him run around. He had a metal pipe in his hand. I was like, "Colby, what are you doing with a pipe?" He's like, "I mean, some of the Iraqi firefighters gave it to me. They call thieves Alibaba." And so he's like, "Hey, they gave me this pipe," and I said, "Alibaba." He was like, "Okay." So he was running around with a pipe,
Just whacking
uh,
dudes.
whacking dudes. So it like half a day of that, and they stopped. They
Yeah.
figured out not to stick around when the Marines came around.
That kind of that kind of situation is what we didn't consider, or is what the
Yeah,
leadership didn't consider as we invaded Iraq. Like the invasion was a massive success. I think it went overall. Obviously, we lost people and stuff like that, but you're going to in an invasion of another country. But overall, it was a massive success and went off very quickly, and probably
yeah,
too quickly. And these things, these civil disobedience, civil disorder, you're taking down the centralized government from a country, and what's going to happen? Chaos, and we just weren't
yeah.
prepared for that. Is what it seems like, for someone that has seen it from the outside looking in. Um, do
Yeah,
you think that could have been helped though? Do you think there would have been a way to properly prepare for something like that for like the over the next following months after the invasion, the breakdown of like the societal, norms and stuff where people just started losing their mind, start rioting, looting, joining the Fedayeen and stuff like that, becoming insurgents.
I think the only way would have been to roll in with a much larger force and just like you have to, like the Pottery Barn rule, like you gotta own it once you roll in, and you've got to be the law and order until you can transition somebody competent
Mm-hmm.
into power.
For
And
sure.
the Marines by and large did that wherever Marines were, kind of took control. And it sounds like, from what I've heard, I mean, I wasn't there, but it sounds like a lot of the Army units didn't. They kind of sat back, and the idea was the Iraqis were supposed to do it, but the Marines didn't wait for the Iraqis to do it. We just stepped in. It seems like the Army tried to sit back and let the Iraqis do it, and when they didn't, everything kind of went to shit.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we stepped in pretty quickly and restored order very, very quickly. Like within a day, the rioting had stopped, the looting had stopped. So there were some other riots going on. Like I know one of the other lieutenants I went to IOC with, his platoon got rolled into a task force that was basically just going around reacting to riots around the city. Like they got it outfitted with all the riot gear, and they would just roll out in 7 tons and go respond to riots. Um, he actually like flipped riot control tactics. Like normally with riot control tactics, you've got a shield line that moves forward, and then you've got a snatch teams behind it. And when you identify like an instigator, you send a snatch team in front of the shield line and try to grab that guy and detain him to remove the instigator, to try to help calm things down. And he flipped it. He put the snatch teams in front, and they would basically run around and just identify kind of the leadership, beat them up, and then just have the shield line kind of sweep up behind them as they were moving through. But yeah, when I got back, I went to a non-lethal weapon conference, and I actually like said that, like, hey guys, like we've always been taught that there's going to be this, they talk about like the 3-block war back then, and we always thought that there was going to be like the combat operations and then like a nice clean break before you get into the what we called MOOTWA back then, military operations other than war. And I was like, there's no break. Like it just blended together. One day it was fighting, and then the next day it was not fighting. There were civilians everywhere. Like we were first day in Nasiriyah pulling civilians out of their house and having to search people's houses, and having to yell at my Marines because they're shoving muzzles in old ladies' faces because they don't know what else to do. They don't have any training, and they were still amped up for going into combat. I remember like we were trying to search a house in Nasiriyah, and it's surprising how many people spoke English.
Really?
I remember one of my squad leaders or team leaders, I can't remember which, but he was like slamming his rifle against the door, trying to break it down, trying to breach it. And I walk around the other side of the house, and the family's sitting there, and they all look at me. I'm like, hey, anybody speak English? And one of the guys says, yeah, I speak English. Like, hey, can you go open the door for us? Oh, yeah. So he goes and opens the door. I'm like, hey, guys, quick pause here. Like, let's try asking him to open the door first from now on, instead of like beating everything.
You're not doing yourself any favors by making enemies, one house at a time. That's kind of the tough thing for some people to accept or to understand, I guess, that like these little things that you might do to the local populace that you see as whatever, it's just part of war or it is what it is, really affects the mission and the overall outcome of something like that. And an example I thought of, in Afghanistan when I was there in 2011, I was out on a mission. We were doing like what was supposed to be a raid on what was supposed to be a IED production facility or whatever. And we go in, we helo in, and ends up being nothing. It's just like a couple compounds. And there might have been something else there, but there was no IEDs being produced. But anyway, I'm sitting there with these infantry guys, and we're at this point, we'd already swept everything, we'd already looked, we'd already talked to everybody, and we were waiting on the helos to come in, pick us up so we could fly back. And sitting there just talking with the infantry guys that were out there, and one of them's like drinking water, and he finished his bottle of water, because it's what you're getting overseas a lot of times, and just chucks it into the canal. And I'm like, come on, man, like, why you got to do that? And I get it, dude. They don't care about their own shit. Like in Afghanistan there's a lot of nasty stuff there. There's a lot of trash. There's like things, it is what it is. But that doesn't mean that we should go in and add to it. And I think that perception that, well, fuck them, they're already like, they live this way already. So what? Who cares? I don't know. I think that's not for me personally, I always saw that as a bad take. And I think that's one of the, I think it's harder things for guys to get over that are going over there. You know what I'm saying? Like have a little common courtesy for your fellow man,
Yeah. So where the CMOC and the Fort CP was set up, like we were supposed to bivouac in this, essentially the schoolyard next to it. We went in to clear the school, and we found that there was a family that was basically living in the school as caretakers. And originally we were like supposed to kick them out. We started talking to the family. I'm like, hey, you know what? You guys live in the school. We'll stay in the yard. No big deal. We got our little 2-man tents. We'll just sleep there. Not a big deal. So we racked out in the yard, and their kids. So there was a little like Coca-Cola bottling plant in Al-Qud, and their kids started bringing us this bottle of Coke. And so the Marines would buy a couple bottles of Coke off them for 50 cents a bottle, I think. But they wanted the bottles back to go back and get more, so they could sell more. And like the Marines got really tight with these kids. Like they play soccer with them. And then when other units would come through and they'd buy soda from the kids, and then they wouldn't give the bottles back. Like my Marines would go like hunt down the guys who still had the bottles. Like, hey man, give the kid his bottle back.
That's funny.
Yeah. Like, I mean, they kind of adopted these kids. Like this family cried when we loaded up to leave. Like they were out there crying and waving as we left the town.
Those little shreds of
Um,
humanity, that you see in these moments like that, it gives you kind of hope, for the future of all of us.
yeah, I mean, it really calmed down after that. Like we got sent out to set up a VCP one night and stop traffic on a road, and we got out there. We got out there pretty early. Like we started the patrol. We got there, and we were there like an hour before we were supposed to shut down traffic. So we're just sitting there. It's hot. And there was a little ice cream shop right there. So the squad leader was like, "Hey, let's go buy some ice cream for the boys." So we went in, and I handed them a $20 bill, and they handed me a stack of Saddam dinar back as change, and I got ice cream for the whole squad. We sat and ate ice cream until it was time to shut down the road.
That's
Um,
cool, man.
so yeah, it calmed down a lot. Like the task force headquarters guys were getting their dry cleaning done out in town.
Really?
Like,
Wow.
so by this point, our camis were like rotting off of
Mm-hmm.
us, all the grunts. Anyway, like I had guys that were wearing more duct tape than
Really?
cloth. Their shit's all taped together. And as a lieutenant, like mine's probably in the best condition, but I've still got my knees taped together. Uh, everything else. I ran into a lieutenant colonel who was a VMI grad that was on the MEB staff, and he didn't even recognize me from the ship. We were all dirty and grungy. Uh, but anyway, so I'm walking in the CP one day, which was set up in this hotel, and I see a lieutenant that I'd become friends with on the ship, and he's got a stack of brand new camis, or look like brand new camis, and they're all clean and pressed. I was like, "Oh, sweet, dude, did we get a cami resupply?" Like, no, man, this is dry cleaning from out in town. I'm like, you gotta be shitting
That's
me.
funny.
Like, I got dudes that have got duct tape from their ankle to their crotch,
Getting
and you
dry
guys are
cleaned
getting
over
dry
here.
cleaning.
These are my inspection cameras. We got an inspection coming up on Friday, so be ready. No, that's
Yeah.
funny. That's crazy, man. It's just
So
it's a weird. So you guys were in a weird dynamic because you were the invaders, right? So you were the first ones there,
yeah,
and so your experience in Iraq would have been completely different than everyone else that followed you because it's just everything was new at that point. Everything was you guys were trying to figure out what the hell's going on. The Iraqis are trying to figure out what the hell's going on because I'm sure a lot of them didn't even realize there was a war coming. You know what I'm saying? Like it kind of like what is
yeah.
all this? Um,
there were no fobs. Like, I mean, I spent plenty of times just sleeping on the side of a highway somewhere. We just stopped and like, hey, pull security on this overpass. Okay, we'll go dig some skirmishers trenches and just
yeah.
rack out. Uh,
Were you guys hit by any IEDs on that deployment? Was that a thing yet?
I didn't even
Yeah.
know what an IED
Yeah, I
was
didn't think
back then.
so.
First time I heard of it was when I went to Afghanistan
Oh,
later that
okay.
year.
Yeah. And I want to get into all that, man. I told you before, I try to stop around 2
Yeah,
hours. We're just over 2 hours now, which is not a big deal. I want to get into you. It's crazy. You did your Iraq deployment and got back in, what is it, November of '03. And then you got back in July of '03 and then turned around and went to
yep,
Afghanistan in November of '03. So I definitely want to talk about all
yeah,
that, but I think we need to save it for a second episode. And then, because we'll talk about that, and then
yeah,
we'll talk about how you got into Anglico. Because a lot of times, you hear about it back in your time frame, or maybe before, of infantry officers being at Anglico, but that's not a common occurrence. And some people question like why an infantry officer would want to go there, and people like me are like, why don't we have more, like a couple there that can help train guys on some of the stuff that you're expected to know. And stuff like that. So I think that'll be a
yeah.
really interesting conversation. However, I want to give you any time you want, though, to if there's anything else from this deployment that you want to go over.
Yeah, I think that was like mostly wrapped up at that point. Like we spent a couple weeks in Al Qud patrolling. Everything calmed down. We got on pretty well with the locals after that. And then we did the long convoy out back to Kuwait. I will say the funny thing, we got back to Kuwait. Um, so before the invasion, like when we were in this camp in Kuwait, they finally built a chow hall, but you could get like one hot meal a day. Um, and it was very limited. Like what you get like one spoonful of eggs and like one
Yeah.
sausage for breakfast. Uh, they had like sausage and bacon. You could get one of each. Or, you got very little to eat. Um, and then we had like one opportunity to get a shower in the month that we were there. Um, so they set up showers in Al Qud before we left. At I forget the name of the camp we were at. But then we get back to Camp Shoop, and they got showers set up, and there's no restrictions. Like take as long a shower you want. Um, so something that happened for some reason I didn't have a change of socks for the entire invasion. So I
Ooh.
wore the same socks for
Well,
like
your
two.
feet
Oh yeah,
didn't
they were
fall
disgusting.
off.
Yeah, so I chucked my boots and my socks into the burn pit in Camp Shoop. Got some fresh boots out of because we left our sea bags in
Yeah.
Camp Shoop when we left. So I had fresh boots and fresh socks and everything in my sea bag. So I, changed got showered, put on clean socks and boots, and we went to the chow hall. And I remember you get in the chow hall and you're like, hey, can I get 2 scoops of eggs? I'm like, yes, here you go. Like, hey, I want sausage and bacon. Can I have both? Like, absolutely. Like, no, I don't think you heard me right. I want both. Yes, you can have both.
So this
Okay.
became like a legit DFAC got built, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it was the local contractors type, but yeah, I mean, we only had like a day in Kuwait before we flew back to the ship. And then getting back to the ship I don't remember anything too dramatic about that. I mean, most of the field grade officers chose to fly back, so there was more room on the ship after that.
Oh, of course. Of course.
So I guess I will talk about, so we get back to the ship. I remember my company commander saying like, hey, the Navy's they'll be a little weirded out. He was like, hey, just, all you got to do is kind of mutter to yourself a little bit, maybe let your hand shake a little bit, and they'll leave you alone. So we didn't have too many problems with the Navy, but as we start heading back, Liberia starts to go south, and they decide they need to conduct a NEO in Liberia. And obviously the MEU would normally be the guys to do that because we didn't train anything on NEOs. But the MEU was, you talked to Daniel Gordon, right? Who was that MEU. Well, they were in Mosul. So they didn't have anybody to go do this NEO. They tasked.
Can you explain what a NEO is real quick for those that don't know?
Yeah, so non-combatant evacuation operation. So go in and basically evacuate all the American and third country civilians out of the area because the conditions are going south and it's becoming too dangerous. And so the State Department basically tries to get everybody out so we don't have to worry about going in to rescue people later. Try to get them out before it goes south. So they decide they need to do a NEO, but they don't have the MEU to be able to do it. The MEU, they go through a 6-month workup period, and that's one of the things that they train on. So they task us, the force on the Kearsarge. But on the Kearsarge, you have 3-2, most of 3-2, and then you have our one company from 2-8, and you have a company of LAR and a company of combat engineers. So you got this like mixed bag of guys. And then my company commander had actually, so when we got into Kuwait, we had our quad cons, which is a big metal storage container that gets shipped back to the States. Like they put it on what they call a black bottom ship, a container ship, and ship it back to the States. Well, he put all our crew serve weapons in the quad cons and bonded them and sent them back to the States. So all of a sudden we get tapped like, hey, we were supposed to go to Malta, I think, for Liberty. And we were in the Red Sea. We found out that the Malta visit got canceled because we were going to Liberia.
You guys were probably like, what is happening right now?
Yeah, exactly. Well, so we see the Iwo Jima, which was the ship for the MEU, go in the other direction in the Suez. We didn't know that the BLT had gotten off and gone into Mosul. We just saw their ship heading the other way, and we're like, well, where are those guys going? Why are we not getting Libo after doing the invasion? And we just lost our Liberty port, and they're going off to wherever they're going. So, so my company commander's scrambling, trying to figure out where to get some cruiser weapons from because we don't have any. I think the engineers let us borrow some 240s so that we could do it. We were tasked to like secure the airport for follow-on forces. And we go sit off the coast of Liberia for a week, and I don't remember exactly what happened. I think they waved off. We ended up cruising home, but our ship got home a week later than everybody else because of this thing. And we got no Liberty because we got tasked to go do this thing. And then the 2-6 MEU came along behind us, and they ended up going ashore in Liberia later on, like the artillery battery went ashore for the guys who got the malaria.
It's interesting. I never even, until Daniel Gordon brought it up on our podcast episode, I never even knew that there was anything going on in Liberia, that, there was like a thing.
Yeah, so a buddy of mine, one of my buddies that I made at ANGLICO was in that artillery battery and was one of the guys that got malaria. And apparently got got chewed out by the commandant in
For
in the
getting
hospital.
malaria?
Like the commandant showed up. Yeah, commandant showed up. Was like, why weren't you taking your pills? It's like, we were
They're
taking
not
our
perfect.
pills, sir.
Oh, those were the bad ones
We
too.
still
That
got
was
it. Yeah.
back when the mefloquine or whatever they were giving people that makes people go crazy and shit is what they're
Yeah.
finding out. Dang. So I always wondered what that would be like to get back on ship after like a combat situation. Like you see, I've seen. I'm sure you've seen. What's that? The Pacific. And these guys are coming back on.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a show. These guys are coming back on ship after going to like Guadalcanal and stuff like that. And obviously, your guys' situation was different. But coming back on after going through combat operations, I always wondered what the vibe of the Navy side would be like. Like, are they all standoffish from you? Is it like, oh shit, are these dudes gonna snap on you? Something. I don't know. Can you kind of is that how it was? Was it you said you would kind of mutter and stuff to get them to leave you alone or whatever?
I mean, that was just the advice that the company commander gave us, but I don't remember a whole
Yeah.
lot, to be honest, of it. I mean, because we weren't immune, right? The ship was like we make fun of the Navy of just being limo drivers. Like they were literally just our ride
Mm-hmm.
to get to where we were going. So we didn't really have a lot of interaction with the ship's company. I don't really remember talking to them much or having a whole lot of interaction. We just kind of kept to ourselves and played some poker and some spades on the way home, and that was about
Yeah.
it. Okay, nothing stands out to me about
Yeah.
that one. When we get into future episodes, get into later deployments, I got much more Navy interaction stories to tell on later deployments, but this one, like nothing really stood
Yeah, for
out.
sure, man. Well, we'll schedule that for sure. I got a couple scheduled over the next month, so maybe we'll have to get you back on in January, or if I have some openings come up. But I definitely want to have you come back on and talk about your follow on deployments, because you've had a couple after that, and your time at ANGLICO and your time as a JTAC and JTAC evaluator. We can kind of compare and contrast, that time frame as a JTAC to a time frame when I got out in 2018 and stuff like that. So, but I do appreciate you coming on and telling your story, man. I think it's great for guys like you to come on and give people background information and more context to these situations like Nazaria and stuff like that. I hope that battle for sure is not one that is forgotten too easily, because that was an important step into the war in Iraq, and it's obviously a I don't know, just a crazy point in people's lives that were there, that were directly involved in something like that. And having someone come on like yourself and that was more familiar with the area. You obviously weren't in, the battle right up front there, but you have a better understanding and give us that background information is just, it's just key for understanding these historic events and stuff, and that we don't forget things like that. It's real quick before we get off. It's funny, when I was in MOS school, when I was a motor team mechanic in MOS school, I was waiting to pick up, and they were like, "Hey, Kramer, go clean the company office," or whatever it was. And one of at the logistics school at Camp Johnson, all the MOSs are together in holding platoons until your individual schools pick up. And one of the platoon sergeants was an infantryman, and I didn't know why. I'm like, "Why is this infantry guy over here?" But they had me clean the office one day, and I remember I was sweeping the office, and he had a NAM with the V warrant on his desk. And, so I stopped and I read it, and he was at Nazaria, and he was a mortarman. And it was talking about how he had basically was like chucking grenades back and forth between him and Iraqis and stuff like that, and had killed like an enemy mortar team. And I'm sitting here reading this like, what the fuck? I'm a private, and I'm just like, this is the first dude that I had interacted with now that I am 100% know that this dude's been in combat and he's done some crazy stuff, and like as a private I'm like, this dude's a war hero, and so for me, Nazaria, I always think of that guy when someone brings up Nazaria, because it's like the first like real, I guess in my mind, like the real dude I met that had actually done something and been somewhere that I kind of looked up to, was in like a leadership position over me, even though it wasn't anything real. It was holding platoon for MOS school, but it still had this like, holy shit, like this dude did like legit things, and no one else knows that. Like, he didn't tell us that, and no one else in the platoon even knows this stuff, that this guy is like legitimate, and I don't know. It's just that's just an interesting time. The invasion always, that whole thing interests me, because I brought it up to, I think I might have said it to Daniel Gordon, but you are now like a part of history as an invasion force. You were part of an invading force that went and took over another country. And some people see that as a good thing. Some people see it as a bad thing, depending on how you want to view the war in Iraq. But it doesn't matter. It still stands that you were part of that. So how does that feel? Knowing that in the history books for till the end of time, you were part of a force that will be talked about.
I mean, it's definitely interesting to be a part of history. Like it's something that will be talked about for a long time. I wish that it had a better outcome. At the tail end of our involvement of Iraq, like I wish if we were going to do it, we'd taken the time to do it and put the effort in to do it right,
Mm-hmm.
so that it was successful in the long run.
Yeah.
I mean, invasion. God, I mean, you think like that was probably the highest trained the Marine Corps had been at that point, at most proficient. Now maybe Desert Storm, because of all the training they did during the Cold War. But I mean, the Marine Corps, like everybody that was in at that time knew combined arms, uh, and it just shows. Like especially like First Marine Division was probably at their peak, and the way they just kind of went through everything like a hot knife through butter. I mean, granted, the Iraqis didn't put up the most. Their army was pretty worn down from what it had been in 1990 and 91. But just the way that everything kind of came together and the way that everything was coordinated, like it was kind of like the perfectly executed conventional operation. Like, yeah, some things went wrong, some guys died, but in general, like it executed very, very well. That was kind of interesting to be a part of. Like it just, and to contrast it to everything that came after. The differences in rules of engagement where, in the invasion, like hostile intent was pretty much if he looked at you funny, compared to the rules of engagement the guys had to deal with later on. Just the fact we were dropping DPICM
Yeah.
on a tank. I patrolled through a lot of fields of unexploded DPICM bombs afterwards, because we used it so liberally. We saw quite a bit of DPICM out there.
Yeah, that's that.
But the fact that they fired a regimental fire mission at one point. I think it was that night that the tank happened and the attack on the main CP. They fired a regimental fire mission. 110 did a direct fire engagement. Like they dropped the tubes and fired direct fire mode at some guys that were attacking them.
Yeah, that's wild stuff, man.
I remember my buddies, my artillery officer buddies, talking about that. Like a friend of mine who said, "I don't know what was more intimidating, seeing the tubes lower at you, or seeing all the Lance Corporals get the cameras out. Like this is going to be awesome."
That's crazy. I think I know the fire mission you're talking about too for the regimental fires. It's that nighttime one with the wrap rounds. There's like it's like 5 minutes of shooting wrap rounds into Baghdad or something like that. The video I've seen.
This was Nasiriyah. This was the attack that was supposedly massing to come at us from the south. It was in this compound. They got intel that it was there. They hadn't been able to confirm it because of the weather. They couldn't get any air overhead. And so finally the task force was like, "Hey, just get all the artillery we got and shoot it all into there." And so nothing materialized out of there. I think they probably had some signals too. Like there was something telling them that there was a force there. And so they just shot a shit ton of artillery at it and made it go away.
Do it, man. Artie will rue the day,
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I'll give you opportunity if you have any kind of organizations you want to give a shout out to, or your own social media if you're into that. You can go ahead and.
Yeah, I haven't dealt with these guys in a while. I'll talk Marine Corps Law Enforcement Foundation. They're up mostly they're nationwide, I think, but a lot of the stuff they do is up around New York. I worked with them a lot when I was on I&I duty in New Jersey. They're a great organization. They do a ton for specifically families of Marines that pass away. They do scholarships. They actually they went out of their way. So during the invasion, there was a 46 full of Royal Marines that crashed, and they went out of their way to find the families of the Royal Marines and provide them benefits as well. So I dealt with them a lot again in New Jersey. They were always out supporting a lot of our events, supporting Toys for Tots, and doing a lot of great things there. So I had a lot of great experiences with them. Number 5 Fund, again, dealing with on I-9 duty, dealing with some of that with Toys for Tots and the Keiko stuff. Like Semper Fi Fund was always a great supporter of
Mm-hmm.
families of fallen Marines.
That's one that always gets brought up.
Yeah. And so local here, even though I'm not a MARSOC guy, so a guy right down the street runs the Raider Project. And they do a lot for transitioning service members. And what really stands out, the time that I had the most interaction with him, I moved back to Camp Lejeune right when Hurricane Florence hit. And I evacuated my family because it was a Cat 4 at the time. So we evacuated back to my parents' place inland. And I came back about a week before my family did and didn't have any damage to my house. So I was just kind of sitting around like watching Netflix, and I mowed the grass. I had nothing better to do. And then I got on Facebook and I saw that Nick Kumalatsis and the Raider Project were out. I mean, he grabbed a bunch of guys and just started going around to people's houses that had flooded or had water coming through the roof, and he was just ripping out all the damaged drywall, all the furniture, anything that had been damaged, ripping it out. Not really doing any of the coming in and doing the construction, but at least saving them the cost on doing all the demolition to get all the wet stuff out so that their houses wouldn't start to mold. Like get all the wet drywall out so that the studs could dry out, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I spent a good week with those guys, and he literally was just taking phone calls from people and sending teams of guys out to go rip people's houses, rip stuff out and help them out. Just spent a lot of time doing that. So I was very impressed with what he did. And he obviously helps with transitioning service members, specifically MARSOC, but seems like a pretty good organization for my interaction with them.
That's awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing those.
I'll throw them a shout out.
Yeah, people check those out. And as always, make sure to check out my Instagram. It's at Former Action Guys and at J Kramer Graphics, and my website's jkramergraphics.com. And I think that's it for this week, man. So it's actually Friday, so have a good weekend.